When I was a child, sometime between 5 and 10, I experienced an event that has stayed with me throughout my memory, though some is fragmented as bits and pieces of what I remember, and the rest was filled in years later by my mum. Mum had a close friend called Donna. Donna and her daughter often spent time with me and my sister. We had sleepovers, playdates, and shared a lot of fun moments together. One particular night, however, was different. Donna had been having problems with her boyfriend, Fred. I don't know if she had come to our house specifically to escape him, or if she was already there when things escalated. Either way, the night took a terrifying turn. I remember Donna rushing my sister, her daughter, and me into my sister's room. She quickly flipped the full-size bed on its side, creating a makeshift barrier and propping the mattress and box spring against the wall. Then she shoved the dresser against the door. We huddled together on the floor behind the mattress. I closed my eyes and covered my ears, still afraid of the dark, while my sister cried softly beside me. The room felt suffocating, the air thick with fear. The shadows from the street lights outside danced eerily on the walls, making the entire situation feel surreal. That's the last thing I remember from that night. Years later, my mum filled in the missing pieces. Fred had shown up at our house unexpectedly, looking for Donna. My mum went outside to try and calm him down, telling him Donna wasn't there and that she hadn't seen her. Fred didn't believe her. He went back to his car and pulled out a shotgun and fired as my mum fled towards the house. The blast peppered her back with pellets and damaged the front of our home. She managed to lock the door behind her and call the police. She actually dialed before confronting Fred, knowing something was off. Fortunately, we lived just down the street from the police station, and officers arrived quickly. They subdued Fred without further incident. My mum later described the incident as terrifying. The moment she heard the gun go off and felt it sting in her back, she realized the danger we were in. My mum's boyfriend, who worked nights, rushed home as soon as he heard what happened. He was checking on us when my dad arrived. My parents were divorced but co-parented us. My dad hadn't gotten the full story when my mum called, only hearing boyfriend, shooting, and kids. He assumed the worst. The moment he saw my mum's boyfriend, he punched him and knocked him out cold. It was a misunderstanding, and once he learned the truth, my dad apologized. There were no hard feelings afterwards. Both men were just focusing on making sure we were safe. The aftermath of that night lingered for years. I remember seeing the bullet holes on the front of the house and feeling a shiver of fear every time I walked past them. My mum told me the full story about a year later before she passed. The pellets from that night had never been removed. They remained lodged in her neck and back, causing her chronic pain for the rest of her life. For reasons I never fully understood, doctors couldn't remove them, and she lived with that pain until the day she died. That night left scars on us all, visible and invisible, but it also showed me the lengths my mum went to in order to protect us. And even in the face of fear and violence, how she acted with courage and bravery. It was September in central Idaho. Autumn had come to the mountains, and with it, bow hunters looking for mountain goats. My cousin Vern is an avid hunter. He's been all over North America hunting various game, bears in Alaska, wild hogs in Texas, bighorn sheep in Wyoming. But his favorite hunting area was the Lemmy Mountain Range in central Idaho. Our extended family has been hunting in those mountains for generations. We know every river bottom and mountain peak, like many people know their own neighborhoods. Mountain goats are a fascinating animal to hunt. They live well above the tree line in rocky environments, and are sure-footed and can climb near vertical slopes. Hunting these animals requires one to venture into these dangerous areas. You have to be mindful as you pursue an animal like that. One wrong step on a rocky slope, or one loose rock could mean you're never going home again. Vern was an expert mountain hunter. It's something he was born to do, and he decided to hunt in the Hayden River area of the Lemis. It's a familiar spot to most locals, and the area is home to plenty of mountain goats. The first mile of his hike was uneventful as he climbed up the canyon. The air was crisp, and his breath formed in great plumes as he progressed. The sun was just peeking over the mountains when Vern came to a small deer trail. He decided it might be a nice shortcut from his usual route, and took it. A few hundred feet up the trail, he saw something odd pop out from behind a tree. It was a man dressed in a light denim coat and jeans who was carrying a small backpack. My cousin stopped for a second to get his bearings, unsure of where the man came from. He waved at him with both arms. One of them was holding an older-style hunting bow. Acknowledging him, Vern waved back. Although the man looked to be physically fine, it was clear he was in emotional distress. He yelled out something my cousin couldn't quite hear and waved his arm, indicating my cousin should follow him. Vern didn't get any bad vibes from this man and could tell he was genuinely in need of some help. He began to make his way up the canyon, following this mysterious man. Vern could never gain any ground on the guy. He was always just far enough that he couldn't talk to him. Periodically, the man would stop, turn towards him to make sure Vern was still following, and every time he looked back, Vern could see the concern on his face. My cousin did his best to remain calm and keep a smile, unsure who or what he was being led to. It was peculiar, Vern thought as he hiked. He hadn't seen any other vehicles on his drive up to the trailhead. Perhaps he came in from another ridge. What could he possibly be leading him to? He figured one of his hunting parties had been hurt and needed help. Of course, he wouldn't have had to speculate if the man would have just stopped and spoken to him for 5 minutes. Vern lost sight of the guy just past a turn in the trail. The trail opened up into an incredibly steep, rocky talus slope. He looked in every direction and could not locate the man when he heard a whistle. Looking up, he saw the guy about 500 feet up the rocky slope waving at him. There was no possible way he could have gotten up that far in just the short time Vern lost sight of him. He still didn't feel any fear or wariness about this strange situation, though. The man was waving more frantically now, practically begging Vern to follow him up the slope. With a sigh and a grunt, he started up the rocks. It was going slow. Every other step caused a mini rock slide and would cause him to continually lose his footing. Huffing and puffing on the cool, thin air, my cousin eventually made it to a small landing. It had taken him nearly 45 minutes to get to the spot where he saw the man from below. There was no earthly way anyone could have done that scramble up the hill any faster. Completely exhausted and very out of breath, Vern sat down on the stone landing. He looked around but couldn't see the man anywhere. As he scanned his surroundings, he saw something odd poking out of the boulder 20 feet over from him. Walking to it, he found a weathered boot. 2 boots, actually. Inside these boots and under the boulder as well were bones. Vern looked around once again for the man but never saw him. Instead of feeling eerie or unnerved, Vern felt a sense of relief wash over him. These emotions weren't his own. What he felt seemed to come from all around him. He marked the spot with his GPS and decided to make his way down and call the authorities. The Lemhi County Sheriff's Office responded, and he led them up the canyon to the body. It took 4 grown men to push the boulder out of the way, and when they did, they found the skeletonized remains of a man. On the body they found hunting equipment and some personal effects. From a credit card in the wallet, they were able to identify the man. He was a bow hunter that had gone missing almost exactly 53 years beforehand. Vern never wanted to be identified to the public or the missing hunter's family. He didn't want recognition for something like that. To him, it was just one of those bizarre mountain stories. He was happy that the family got closure, even if it was half a century later. The only thing that bothered him was the man leading him up the canyon with his strange and sudden disappearance. He had mentioned the waving man to the sheriff, but was brushed off. When news reports came out announcing the discovery, several photos of the man were published. Vern was absolutely shocked when he saw them. As in the photos, it was the man that had been leading him up the mountain to the body. It finally made sense to him. The man's distressful look, the constant checking if Vern was following him, the sense of relief he felt when the body was discovered. That man was desperate to get home, and through Vern, he was able to be reunited with his family. My name is Joaquin. I'm 25 years old and live in Rosario, in a neighborhood close to a forest known as Bosque de los Constituyentes, located in the northwest area of my city. It's got a bit of a safety issue here, which is why I don't really go out much. I generally just stick to my studies, as I'm in my last year of law school. But I do get a bit lonely sometimes, and that's what prompted me to download Tinder, to see if I could meet someone interesting. One night at around 9 p.m., I matched with a girl who only had a few pictures on her profile. They seemed old as they were blurry and somewhat pixelated, but I set that aside. We started chatting. Her name was Joanna. She was 23, and it appeared that she lived in the nearby neighborhood. I liked her because she was very talkative, but at the same time it was strange, because it seemed like she had nothing else to do but to talk to me. And when I didn't send a reply quick enough, she sent me messages insisting I get back to her. It was a Saturday evening when I suggested we finally meet up. She said she was busy until 10 and that she would be finishing work at a nearby supermarket. Now, as I mentioned, my area isn't exactly super safe, so I was quite wary. I didn't want to end up inviting a stranger to my place, so I asked if we could meet elsewhere. She said her place wasn't an option and suggested somewhere else. When I asked where, she said the forest. I declined, saying that it closed at 6 p.m., but she insisted, saying she knew a way in, and that it would be quieter and more private, if you get what I mean, and to meet there at 1 a.m., offering to send instructions on how to enter later. I suggested it would be better if we entered together, but she replied a while later saying she would go ahead and check if there were people around or if the terrain was bad, explaining that sometimes people stay in the forest at night, if you get what I mean. This seemed a bit odd to me, though. I thought about saying no, or making up an excuse to avoid going, as I really didn't like the place, despite never having actually visited it, neither by day or by night, even though I lived so close. But as the night approached, I got nervous, and thought maybe it wasn't such a good idea to meet there. She insisted so much that I ended up giving in. It was 1:15 a.m., and I left my house very quietly so my dad wouldn't find out. I turned on my phone and saw that I had received a message from her, in which she explained that I had to follow a particular stream until I found a part of the fence that was broken, and that was where I was supposed to enter. I was nervous and a bit scared about the date, but despite the feelings, I also felt quite confident and excited to meet Joanna. But the deeper I went into the forest, the more that confidence crumbled. The place looked desolate and spooky, and I kept asking myself what the hell was I getting into. I moved forward until I reached the stream she mentioned. My skin at this point was crawling, and it was genuinely very cold out. I followed the stream until I found an area with a broken wire, which I assumed was the place she meant. I entered, but just as I took a few steps, I immediately grabbed my phone and sent her a message telling her that I was there. At that moment, I heard the sound of a nearby phone. She replied, "I see you." It was getting a bit too creepy for me. How could she see me? It was all pitch black. What was I gonna do? What was gonna happen? These were some of the questions that were running through my head, and suddenly I started to hear footsteps on the grass, as if someone was approaching. Then I heard a hello from afar, but that voice somehow told me things were going to end badly. It was somewhat distinctive. It seemed to be getting closer to me, and from the distance she said, "Please turn that off. I have a surprise for you, but I want to show you something, no cheating." Despite my doubts, I ended up turning it off. I need to emphasize that my phone in particular turns the flashlight on and off by shaking it, so I shook my phone and it switched off. I pocketed it and continued waiting. Then I heard the steps get closer until they were just feet away, but I still couldn't see anything. "What are you doing, Joaquin? You took a while." I didn't reply. I was too nervous. She came closer and grabbed my hand. "Come on, I want to show you what I promised." Her hand was strange. It felt very padded and cold. The hairs on her arms were thick, prickling my skin, and we started to walk in a straight line. But with every step, my fear intensified. We had walked quite a bit without exchanging a single word. Maybe it was only a minute, but in my head it felt like hours. Eventually, I stopped walking and asked her, "What are we doing? Where do you want to go?" That's when I heard other footsteps. They weren't ours. They were a bit further away. It was at that moment my nerves skyrocketed, and my heart seemed to want to jump up my chest. "It's okay, Joaquin, we're just walking." Then I grabbed my phone and shook it, turning on the flash, and I started shining it everywhere. I was terrified. This person wasn't a 23-year-old girl, but a woman of around 50, wearing a black and red dress. Her face looked evil, with hatred plastered all over it. But that's not all. As nervous as I was shining the flashlight everywhere, and from afar I could see other people. They were wearing dark clothes too, so all I could really make out were their heads. Then, in the distance, a very bright light shone, and at the same time, a heartbreaking scream of pain was heard. I turned around and could barely notice that in the distance there was a group of these people gathered around a cross where it appeared a person was nailed, and they had started to set it on fire. At that point, Joanna grabbed me tightly by the hand and tried to pull me towards there. I think it goes without saying that everything was clearly a setup. The woman had posed as someone my age to deceive me, and who knows, probably to kill me or use me in a ritual. They were definitely a cult. My parents always taught me to never lay a finger on women, but at that moment, that went out the window. I wasn't going to die there, and since struggling didn't help me break free from her grasp, I punched her directly in the face. I didn't hesitate, and started running, trying to find the way I'd came. I don't think they followed me, or I ran too fast because I reached a fence, jumped over it and just kept on running, until I saw a light. It was a house with its lights on and people inside. I ran towards them and they looked worried. When I told them what happened, they told me I shouldn't wander around there at night, because strange things have been known to happen out there. I was trembling and in shock. I called my parents, who arrived some 15 minutes later, and for days I looked for that woman's profile, but her contact had disappeared, and her number was marked as non-existent. On Tinder, her profile had completely vanished. Be wary who you meet online. Try to always meet first in a public place, as you never know what people's intentions truly are. I live in a small town just outside of Canada's capital city of Ottawa, called Manotick. It's a lovely little place with many heritage buildings, one of which I'm currently sitting in while writing this down. I grew up in Ottawa just down the street, so I was very familiar with the city from a young age. It was a common school field trip destination as it had a famous local attraction, the Watson Mill. I remember going for tours of the mill as early as grade 3. The mill serves as the heart of Manotick and hosts many local events. It's open every day for the public to tour, and you can walk across the old stone-controlled dam which harnesses the running waters of the Rideau River to mill grains. The mill and surrounding historic buildings are dedicated to educating the public on the history of the area. They even have people dressed in the garb of the 1800s who will take you on little tours and answer your questions. Our house is just down the road and is part of the local historic tour. Weekends bringing a lot of yuppies on strolls through the lovely neighborhoods, especially in the fall when Canada is at its most magical. The Watson Mill is a famous haunted destination in the Ottawa area. Newer management of the mill has made efforts to sweep the spooky from its history, but the tragedy that occurred in the mill can't be erased. The mill is the home of the ghost of Anne Courier, and this is her story. Joseph Courier was a native of North Troy, Vermont. He had known his fair share of sorrows as an 1855 tragedy struck when all 3 of his children died within 5 days of each other. Just 3 years later, his first wife passed away, leaving Joseph a broken man. Seeking solace, he traveled to the serene waters of Lake George, New York, and checked into the Crosby-side Hotel. It was there, amid the tranquil setting, that Joseph met Anne Crosby, the tall and radiant daughter of the hotel's proprietors. Anne's beauty and warmth rekindled a spark in his heart, and before long the two were married. Their love carried them onto a honeymoon across the northeastern United States, filled with hopes of a brighter future. By February of 1861, Joseph was now a co-owner of a new grist mill in Manotick, Ontario. And wanting to share his pride and joy with his young bride, the mill, a marvel of its time, had just celebrated its first anniversary, so he brought Anne to see it, eager to show her the fruits of his labor. But on a cold winter's night, Anne wrapped herself in flowing garments and toured the mill with wonder in her eyes. The machinery whirred and clanked around her, a testament to Joseph's success, no doubt. But in a tragic twist of fate, her elegant white flowy dress became caught in the spinning turbine equipment, and in a horrifying instant, Anne was thrown violently against a support pillar, where she perished on the spot, leaving Joseph utterly devastated. Grief-stricken, Joseph could no longer bear the sight of the mill, and he sold his shares to his business partner Dickinson and left Manotick forever. Anne was laid to rest in Beechwood Cemetery, Ottawa. But Anne's story didn't end there. Locals and visitors alike claim her spirit lingers in the mill to this day. They speak of bloodstains and fingernail marks etched into the post where her life ended on the second floor. People report feeling a sudden chill and the unmistakable sensation of being watched in the spot where her life came to an abrupt end. It was as if Anne never truly left. As you can imagine, locals know this story, as we've heard them as children when we visit the mill in the fall on field trips. There are conflicting reports as to what actually happened to Anne, with a family friend writing back to England at the time, claiming to have witnessed her death and that she was thrown into the machinery and torn to pieces before their very eyes. The old groundskeepers of the mill have reported second-story windows, long sealed shut by age of lack of use, flying open in the middle of the night. Countless reports of sightings of a young woman in the window or hearing screaming or crying can be accounted for. When you visit the mill, you can walk right up to the spot where she died and touch the post where she supposedly hit her head on. It can be a very eerie place when you know what has taken place there. They used to do haunted sleepovers in the late 90s and early 2000s. I had a friend go as part of her girl group activities, and they were all scared silly over the experience. It's a lovely spot during the day and I highly recommend it. But now onto my house and my personal experiences. As I said, I live in one of Manatik's heritage homes that is older than Canada has been a country. My family bought this house several years ago, and every owner can be traced back since it was a cabin in the middle of nowhere built to shelter the original owner. It has served many uses in its lifetime, including the local doctor's practice. It is bizarre to think about sometimes, as people lived and died on an operating table in the room I watch TV in, with their loved ones eagerly waiting in the next room, which is now our powder room. There is no doubt that people have moved on within these walls. That is an easy assertion to make of any dwelling of a certain age, but it is particularly noisy here at times to those who are sensitive. It feels a bit like a crowded waiting room, and other times it's much more like snapshots of moments long past. I wouldn't say there are specific people left behind, but there are fragments, impressions of the many people who have come and gone. But on the very rare occasion, there is an oppressive atmosphere that gives us the heebie-jeebies. This strange phenomenon is what I'll focus my story on. I'm not overly fond of upstairs. I've had most of my creepy encounters up there, as it is the least updated area of the house. The room I used to sleep in with my baby girl is the worst in the house, and I hate to sound cliché, but the closet was the reason. It's old with a heavy door that you really have to work at to turn and open. Despite the fact, it will swing open violently in the middle of the night, or as you're walking past it in broad daylight, completely at random. For example, one night a few months ago I had put my daughter to sleep and headed downstairs with my baby monitor to watch TV with my family. I have the monitor on her at all times, and it's always in my line of sight. So we're chatting and watching TV, and I see the sound in her room goes off, but I hear nothing. There's a pause, and then my daughter, from a dead sleep, lets out an ear-piercing scream and begins to wail. She continues to scream at the top of her lungs as I rush upstairs to comfort her. She's only ever once done this in her life, and it was when she was very, very sick, so obviously I'm concerned. As I get to the door and push it open, I am overwhelmed with fear and dread hanging on my shoulder. It felt like the entire space to my right was a giant dark cloud of terrifying. It's like that feeling you get when you feel something is behind you. It's on my shoulder. My daughter is now sitting up in bed, screaming and crying, facing the corner of the room I'm recoiling at, pointing at nothing I can visibly see. Can you guess what happens next? The closet busts open across the room in the dark. Motherhood trumps all, so I rush to bed, jump in with her and hold her tight to me. I rock her back and forth, shushing her gently as I sit in the dark oppression. I feel that my fear is fueling whatever is happening, and the more I cower, the more powerful it becomes. Now, when I'm in a pinch in the middle of the night, as a new mum, I've taken to calling on my grandma who passed away in 2020 to ask for help. It's often my last-ditch, desperate, sleep-deprived plea to my ancestors when my little one has a fever or won't settle. I know it's very dramatic, I know, but parenting is hard. Anyway, I bring up my grandma and then my husband's grandma, and I ask my family to watch over us and to please help me out. I'm sure other mothers listening can relate to this feeling, but when you're holding your children, You feel such a powerful love. I think it empowers you to be brave. I was once told that envisioning a white light radiating out of you will help repel bad spirits. And in this moment, reflecting on my beloved grandma, while holding the creature I loved most in the world, it became an easy thing to do. The oppressive feeling goes away, my daughter calms immediately, and falls asleep peacefully. I go downstairs to my in-laws and husband, clearly shaken by what has just transpired. They immediately ask what happened, to which I begin to tell them exactly what I just told you. But before I can finish, my mother-in-law asks if the closet door opened. Turns out she had had many experiences in that room, but didn't want to mention it, as I was sleeping in there and she didn't want to freak me out. Thanks. She's spotted dark figures upstairs on numerous occasions, and since she bought the place, she's had many injuries. I've actually lost count. She'd fallen down the stairs on multiple occasions, has slipped doing the simplest things, and I'd never consider her a clumsy person. But this old place has definitely left its mark on her, paranormal or otherwise. I had taken back up sharing this story after several days, as something strange happened while I was getting the last paragraph out. As I started to ruminate on the bad energy in this house, I began to feel it again, right over my shoulder for the first time in months. Of course, I'm writing a spooky story at 2 a.m., so the heebie-jeebies are a consideration. And just as I'm feeling this way, my daughter wakes up screaming once again in the next room. Then I get a text from my little sister, who was sleeping over that night, upstairs in the room I don't like, asking me to please come up and that she was scared. The closet door swings open on her, and she could feel the same oppressive feeling. It seems that bringing attention to this entity empowers it to make an appearance. So now I'm in a mad dash to conclude this story before I conjure up another sleepless night for myself. Toddlers provide enough of those already. Personally, I think it's time we moved house. I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico. It's a beautiful city with a rich cultural heritage, but it's also struggling with high crime rates, constantly ranking among the most dangerous cities in the US. When I was 18, I met my ex-boyfriend through Snapchat. He was 24, and I was naive and unaware of the potential dangers of social media. At the time, I was still healing from a previous relationship that had left me broken and vulnerable. We started talking after he added me through Snapchat's quick ad feature. I thought he found me through a live stream I once did on the messaging app Kik. I was immediately drawn to his striking blue eyes and charming smile. I mistook that attraction for something deeper. We started dating 2 weeks after we met online. Everything moved so fast. I thought it was sweet how intensely he pursued me, so I overlooked the red flags. My relationship with my parents was strained, to say the least. I was angry, rebellious, and hurt from the instability of a broken home. In a fit of defiance, I left and moved in with my ex in Colorado Springs, even though I knew very little about him. I took a Greyhound bus to get there, excited by the idea that someone finally wanted me. The reality hit quickly. When I arrived, he took me in a lift to his friend's apartment. It turned out that this apartment was his current domicile, and that is where we would be living. Only later did I learn that he was hiding from the police due to violent crimes. The relationship was volatile from the start. We fought constantly. He hit me often, and he chipped away at my self-worth with cruel words. He controlled everything about me, from my social interactions to my eating habits, eventually leading me to develop an eating disorder. The week before Thanksgiving, things escalated to a terrifying level. We were staying at another friend's house because the police were about to search the first ones. And while running errands with one of his friends, I received a text from my ex. "If you come back smelling like you've done anything funny, We're done." I was confused. I was literally just shopping for groceries. I even sent him a picture of the friend I was with to reassure him. When we returned, the friend stormed into the house and told my ex off for being so paranoid. The argument between them turned heated, and the friend left angrily. My ex turned that anger on me. We had the worst fight ever. He accused me of cheating, screamed at me, and then beat me more severely than ever before. I was terrified. Grabbing an old government-issued phone that belonged to a friend, I ran from the house with no plan and no belongings. I wandered the streets, crying uncontrollably. I'm usually stoic, but that night I couldn't contain my emotions, and at one point I considered stepping in front of a passing car to end all the pain. While I was lost, my ex called one of his friends to find me. The friend eventually picked me up, pretending to care about my well-being. He took me to his house, promising I would see my ex soon, but it was a lie. My ex later called me saying he hadn't realized his friend was planning to straighten me out. He sounded genuinely confused, and at that point I didn't know what to believe. The next 4 days were a nightmare. The two men kept me locked in the house. They force-fed me food from the groceries I'd bought and forced me into a bathtub and assaulted me sexually. One of the girlfriends was also trapped and abused in a similar fashion. The house became a prison of fear, pain, and degradation. On the 5th day, one of the men told me my parents had been contacted. I didn't believe him, but I played along. When my parents showed up, I tried to signal to them that something was wrong. The captors noticed and held a gun to my head, threatening to end me if I ever returned to Colorado. They stole my insulin and other medication before releasing me. My parents and I ran from the house as fast as we could. I refused to go home initially. All I wanted was revenge. I stayed with the friend from the first apartment and learned more horrifying truths about my ex. He had turned himself in to the police. I discovered that he was part of the MS-13 gang and was suspected of violent crimes, possibly even taking of someone's life. I was numb. The following days blurred together as I slept almost continually, walking only to answer his phone calls and cry afterwards. Despite everything, though, I still felt emotionally tethered to him. Eventually, I returned home with my parents. My mental and physical health deteriorated. I stopped taking care of my diabetes and fell into a deep depression, sleeping through Christmas and into the new year. In January, I was hospitalized with diabetic ketoacidosis, a life-threatening condition caused by neglecting my insulin. I was discharged on Valentine's Day. That same day, my ex called to break up with me. He said he was leaving me for another woman and threatening to break into my house and end the life of my family. That phone call pushed me deeper into paranoia and despair. For months I slept during the day and stayed awake at night, consumed by fear. My PTSD spiraled out of control. The trauma compounded on the pain I'd carried since childhood. I'm doing better now. Healing isn't linear, but I'm taking it day by day. If there's one thing I want others to take from my experience is this: be cautious online. Not everyone is who they claim to be. Real trust is built over time through consistent actions, not pretty words and superficial charm. I was on the last train heading to a friend's house, making my way through the London Underground late at night. It was nearly midnight when the train pulled into Beacon Tree Station, my stop. The platform was eerily quiet, with only the faint hum of the train and the occasional distant echo breaking the silence. As I stepped off the train and began climbing the stairs, a strange sensation washed over me. It felt as though someone were right behind me, their presence almost tangible. I paused for a moment, trying to shake the feeling, but it only grew stronger. With each step, My heart began to race. Unable to ignore it longer, I spun around quickly, and that is when I saw her. Standing a few steps below me was a girl, a ghost. She had no face, and wore a blank, featureless expanse where her features should have been. Her blonde hair hung limply around her pale shoulders, and was dressed in a white, flowing dress that seemed slightly tattered at the edges. I froze in place, my breath caught in my throat. For a moment, all I could do was stare, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. Then pure terror took over. I let out a scream and bolted up the stairs as fast as my legs would take me, and by the time I reached my friend's house, I was still shaking. My heart hadn't stopped pounding, and I could barely get the words out to tell them what had happened. Later that night, I decided to look online to see if anyone else had experienced anything similar. What I found was startling. Beacon Tree Station is supposedly haunted by the spirit of a girl with blonde hair and a white dress and no facial features. It felt surreal for it to be validated. I couldn't believe I had actually seen her. I've been back to Beacon Tree Station a few times since then, but thankfully, I've never seen her since. It happened about 10 years ago. My ex's old complex building had an accident in it, and when I returned from work, there were cops and an ambulance out front. She had called me at work to warn me and tell me she was fine, but that they were investigating something. You see, her apartment was at the end of the main floor hall, and there was blood traced along the wall. The cops couldn't reveal much other than it was a self-inflicted incident and that no one in the building was in danger. A few weeks passed and we were getting home from dinner one evening when I was settled on the couch. I felt someone's eyes on me. My ex was in the bathroom behind me, and I looked to the window on my right, and sure enough there was a man standing there in what I later described to police as all in white. When he saw that I noticed him, he raised his hand up as if to say hello. I immediately screamed for my ex, and by the time she came out, he was gone. This was in Toronto, in not the nicest of areas, so we called the cops to report the incident, possible intruder or peeping Tom. When the cops came and took our report, they said they were going to do a search of the area and report back. Shortly after they left, they phoned to say that the space between the window and the fence behind it was physically too narrow for someone to squeeze back there. They basically said there was no way I saw anyone. But I was dead sober, and I had never called 911 in my life. I was scared. I know what I saw. A little while after this happened, word got around that a man who was staying with his daughter in the building had taken his own life that night. When I heard that, I couldn't help but think back to the man in the window, in the impossibly small space, who was making contact. Of course, I can't know for sure if the two events were related. I only had the encounter once while my ex was still living there, but still I can't help but feel that the man who passed away was making some sort of connection, but I don't know why. After my dad passed away, he visited me in a dream and told me things I literally had no way of knowing. Here's one of the only things I still remember, but first, context. My dad had 2 daughters with 2 different women before meeting my mum, and while she was aware of them before I was born, my dad had no relationship with either of them, and it was only after his death we learned of their existence. I can't blame my dad for hiding them, as their creations were, well, both traumatizing and wholesome. Let me explain. The oldest was an extremely abusive woman who takes after my grandmother. Grandma pushed the relationship on Dad, then helped the lady baby trap my dad and tried to guilt him into marrying her. While it worked for Grandma, aka this is literally what she did to my grandpa, it led to a very abusive childhood for my dad, so he understandably noped out of that one. The younger one was with a friend of his, though I'm unsure about the level of closeness. She had been in a very serious long-term relationship, but for reasons I don't know, they broke up. She had asked my dad to be her rebound, no strings attached, and he accepted. After they did the deed, she had sudden clarity that her ex was her soulmate, and it wasn't before long they were back together. They soon learned she was pregnant, and it came to light my dad was the father. He wasn't ready to be a dad, and those two wanted a family together anyway. Everyone just kind of agreed to pretend my dad wasn't the father. Okay, yeah, so obviously these aren't things you tell your 10-year-old daughter after he died. Sure, you mention the sisters because they might come to the funeral, but you don't explain the situations in which they came to be, nor do you tell them the names of the girls' mothers. There are many things he told me in that dream, and I recounted it all to my mum the next morning. There were lots of details I shouldn't have known, but I did. And these are all things that have been confirmed by multiple people. I don't remember what they were anymore, except for the thing about my sisters, but my mum brings it up all the time. Since then, I've regularly dreamt about people in my life who have passed or who are about to, including pets. Normally they tell me things about their life, any final messages they have, and if they're still alive, they pass within a few days. It's also worth mentioning that my dreams are normally very strange, extremely random, out of their things, so these oddly normal dreams which actually feel so vivid that I can't feel awake are an oddity to me, and they've happened so often and accurately that I can't believe they're anything other than those who have passed or about to, paying me a visit. I was going through a devastating depression after finding out that the woman I had been with for 4 years was cheating on me with someone from her work. It hurt to face the reality that my hopes and dreams had abruptly vanished. I tried to keep my mind occupied with work to avoid thinking about what could have been. Dealing with destructive thoughts was a challenge, and after work I drowned my sorrows in alcohol, in an attempt to forget the wounds that the woman had inflicted upon me. Thus my days passed in my role as a police officer, patrolling a wealthy neighborhood and questioning why that woman had betrayed me in that way. Upon learning about my situation, my colleagues tried to cheer me up and occasionally introduced me to some of their friends. However, at the time, I had no desire to meet anyone else. I felt humiliated and devoid of the will to live. One night, my patrol partner and I stopped to have dinner near a convenience store, and it was there that the laughter of a girl in the store uniform caught my attention. So I turned around, and there I saw Pearl. I don't want to go into too much detail, but after a few months, Pearl and I became a couple, and we married 2 years later. I always asked her to quit her job, but she was never keen on the idea, so she continued to work at the same store near the restaurant where I used to eat at with my partner. Pearl daily would send me 2 messages, when she left home to go to work and when she got there, because I would always pick her up after her shift, so it was always just those 2. But one afternoon the message that she'd arrived at work never came, which made me anxious. My partner tried to calm me down, suggesting that she just forgot, or maybe her phone had run out of battery. When I had the chance during patrol, I deviated from our route to go to the store, thinking that if her phone had died, she would be at the store, and I would be happy and carry on my way to work. But if that were the case, I wouldn't be sharing this story with you now. Because when I arrived, I was informed that she had not come into work that day. That is when my heart sank into my stomach. I called her parents. They knew nothing. I couldn't continue with my shift. I went to her parents' house, and from there I began calling our mutual friends and off-duty police officers to help me start a search. I informed my boss, but I knew perfectly well that they couldn't prioritize my situation. The matter was that the state governor belonged to a different political party than the city mayor, so the governor's people were closely watching us, waiting for an opportunity to make the mayor look bad. Therefore, the mayor had spoken with the police chief and said that if anyone in the department found themselves in the unfortunate need to request support for anything, it could be provided as long as there were no more important issues at the time. I filed a report, but we had to wait at least 8 hours to receive official support from my colleagues at the department. It was during those 8 hours that my colleagues, who were off duty or got away from their tasks, helped me look for Pearl. We talked to the neighbors, visited hospitals in our city and the surrounding one, but no dice. After the 8 hours had passed and the search officially began, with calls to police departments in other cities, alerts to the Attorney General's office and the federal police, I knew with every passing minute that something was terribly wrong, and my anxiety and desperation were just intensifying. In the first 24 hours, we confirmed that she wasn't in any hospitals in the 4 closest cities, nor in any morgue. Then a call came to Pearl's parents' house. The caller said he had seen a young woman similar to Pearl's features being taken. They were walking when a vehicle blocked their path. 2 men got out, grabbed her by the neck, and flung her in, saying it was a grey SUV with 2 doors and a large trunk. The last thing they said before hanging up was the direction the SUV went in. They said it took a street that connects the highway leading to the eastern part of the city, which is less urbanized. You know, unpaved streets, fewer traffic lights. Just like that. But unlike what you might imagine, it wasn't somewhere known for its criminal presence. That's why I found it strange. This call came at around 1 a.m. and Pearl's parents immediately called me, and since it was late and I didn't want to bother my boss, what I did was notify my colleagues, who I knew would back me up. So the 6 of us agreed to meet at a local convenience store by the highway, and we went in a caravan to the neighborhood. Obviously not in our patrol cars, but our personal vehicles. We had just entered one of those neighborhoods when a grey SUV with 2 doors and a large trunk sped past us very quickly. Given its speed and time of night, we decided to follow it. We didn't get too close, simply speeding up enough to keep up with its taillights in view, maintaining a distance of around 200 yards. When we noticed the vehicle starting to slow down, we kept our speed and overtook it, but it was intentional. If the SUV was slowing down, it was because it was about to turn, which didn't lead to a neighborhood at all, but a dirt road cutting through an undeveloped terrain area. By the time we arrived, the SUV had moved further down the dirt road, but we weren't worried because the terrain was rough, so the SUV would have to move slowly. We left 5 cars halfway, and the 6 of us got into a single vehicle and followed the dirt road with the lights off. For the first few yards, we had to speed up a bit to catch up to it, without getting too close, just keeping its taillights in view. The SUV entered what seemed to be a kind of estate, and we stopped around 300 yards from it, got out, and went to check on foot. What we did was start walking around the walls that surrounded the estate, looking for any gap, even a small one, to peek inside. But we didn't find anything all the way around. Obviously, we couldn't just look through the gate, so someone suggested we climb to see what we could see from a distance. We found a tall tree, and one of our guys climbed up. He was there for no more than 30 seconds when he told us something strange was happening. There were men dressed in robes, and there was a large bonfire, and there were girls tied up around it with their faces covered, and that there were at least 9 people with long guns. We had weapons, but they were pistols, and if we tried anything, we knew we would end up dead. I wasn't sure what to do. I didn't even know if Pearl was amongst the girls inside the estate, but if there was even the slightest possibility, I had to take it. We all went back to the car. My colleague made a call to some higher-ups, and 20 minutes later, a SWAT team arrived. We explained the situation and busted in. Using a truck, they knocked down the estate's gate, followed by another 2 trucks. There were a lot of gunshots, but the whole thing lasted less than 5 minutes. One of them signaled us and we ran over there, especially me, heading straight for where the girls were. But before I could reach them, two of their men stopped me and said, "Look, you don't want to see this. Tell us what your goal looks like. We've seen them all." When they said that, my blood ran cold, because I realized the girls were already dead. My colleague caught up to me and saw how nervous I was. They asked me what was going on, and the leader of those guys came over and said they would let me see. And yes, there was Pearl, in the same condition as the other guys. She had been suffocated, with hand marks around her neck, her eyes open, but it looked like she had fought until her last breath. It's not really a consolation, but it was nice to know. They had defended themselves with all their strength. The victims all had burn marks on their feet. Apparently they had been made to walk on something hot. Their hair had been cut. I vomited from the shock. I was devastated and fell to the ground crying. Then, from under a car on the estate, they dragged out a man who was hiding. They were about to shoot him when he was ordered to come over and was asked to reveal what the hell had happened here. He never used the word cult or sect. He just said they were a group of people gathered to hold masses in honor of their god. But regardless of his denial, that's obvious what they were: a cult. The man continued talking, mentioning that the estate was used for not only their strange masses, but other activities I can't detail here. Then he revealed that it wasn't just them, and that they had allies in high places. Not sure what he meant by that, but it sounded like he was implying they were connected with influential people. I was consumed with rage. I wanted to take his life, but I was stopped. They needed him alive. I had to restrain myself. Honestly, I'm very grateful because although I couldn't save Pearl, I was able to at least recover her body and give her a proper burial. We moved back to our apartment complex where I had already experienced strange things before. My older brothers and I were in high school at this point, and my brothers, especially the youngest twin, would throw crazy parties all the time. There were always at least 13 people there whenever I got home from school, which drove me crazy. My mum was a single mum of 4 and always working, so we did whatever we wanted. One day, a group of my brother's friends decided it would be a great idea to play with a Ouija board in his bedroom. I wasn't there for it, but my mum was, and she told me later that the atmosphere in the apartment changed after that. My brother, who never believed in ghosts or anything remotely paranormal, began to experience strange things. He told us that someone in the group acted possessed, passed out, and saw a face appear out of the blanket on the wall above his bed. I wasn't there to witness it, but after that, the house just felt different. In my room, I felt uncomfortable. It was an eerie feeling, and I didn't like being alone. I had a dog that would growl and bark at my closet for no apparent reason, which only added to the discomfort. There was one particular day when I was working on a school project in my room, with my dog lying beside me, when I felt something staring at me. I didn't actually see anything, but my dog started barking and growling like something invisible was coming down the hallway towards us. I was frozen. My dog was going crazy, barking louder and louder, as though something was right in front of us. Then all of a sudden the barking stopped, and my dog's eyes followed something as it moved around the dining room. I couldn't see anything, but based on his reactions, whatever it was moved up the wall and into the corner of the ceiling before disappearing. The whole thing left me shaken. Another time I was unlocking my mum's bedroom door when I saw something in the reflection of the doorknob. A man standing behind me. He was tall, wearing a white doctor's jacket and had a black moustache. I screamed and ran out of the apartment, too afraid to look back. I was certain I had seen something, and it wasn't a figment of my imagination. A friend of mine who came over also had a strange experience. We were sitting in the living room, talking about random things, when suddenly everything on top of the fridge fell onto the floor. The thud was so loud, and we both screamed, running out of the apartment until someone else came home. I moved to a different apartment years later, but things never got any better. I had a tall shelf filled with Harry Potter memorabilia, and at the very top was my sorting hat, which hadn't been touched in years. My dog, who had been calmed since we moved, started growling one day and fixated on the shelf. His hair stood up on end as he stared intently at the sorting hat. Then out of nowhere the hat turned on. I heard it speaking its phrases even though no one had pressed any of the buttons. I picked it up to investigate and realized there were no batteries inside. That especially really freaked me out, but I tried to brush it off. A few minutes later the hat turned on again, this time saying something different. I was so spooked I didn't know what to do. To make matters worse, I started experiencing sleep paralysis. There was one night in particular where I had a vivid nightmare. I saw a demon crawling down the wall, moving towards me as I lay in bed, unable to move. It watched me, and I felt utterly powerless. I started saying, "Jesus Christ," over and over in my mind, trying to wake up. And somehow, I finally broke free. It felt like the demon was studying me, trying to figure out how I was able to break the paralysis, and I've never been more scared. On another night, I saw something stranger still. There was this figure, almost like a plague doctor, dressed in a post-apocalyptic style clothing with a long-nosed mask. Its head was glitching, jerking side to side as it walked towards me with a needle in hand. I could feel it trying to prick my toe, and the sensation was so real that when I woke up, my toe hurt, even though there was no visible mark. Things didn't stop there, though. 2 months ago, my dog started growling at the shelf again, and the sorting hat went off as before. This time, I recorded it on my phone to have proof. I couldn't explain how or why this was happening, but it felt like no matter where I went, something was always following me. No matter how many times I moved or tried to escape the paranormal, it was as if I couldn't shake it. I don't know if it all started with the Ouija board, or if something more sinister has been attached to me all this time, but I've learned to live with it. That doesn't mean it doesn't scare me, it still does. I just try not to think about it, even though deep down, I know it's always there, watching. My parents got a divorce several years prior, so me and my little sister, 2 years younger, used to stay with our dad every other weekend. One day he introduced us to his new girlfriend, Rachel, who was a tall, blonde woman that had apparently won some kind of beauty pageant. I remember those first months of getting to know Rachel as fun. She seemed like a nice lady. I also think my initial impression of her was helped by the fact that she had a rather cuddly grey parrot and a pet raven that could talk, which of course made my younger self quite ecstatic. But after a while, things started to change. I began to notice she could be odd at times, saying weird things or acting a bit strangely. We started seeing her less frequently when staying with our dad. Then one day he told us they'd broken up, and that we wouldn't be seeing her anymore. He also told us we shouldn't talk to her or go home with her if she ever showed up at school. Not long after that, Rachel really started harassing my dad. She would randomly turn up at places we went to visit during weekends, trying to talk with us. She called him non-stop on the phone when we were at home, crying, making threats, and it usually didn't stop until he pulled the plug. Years later, I found out she had even threatened to take the life of my sister and myself on several occasions, and then my dad got a restraining order. Rachel also keyed my dad's car, broke into his company to trash it, and stole a lot of money that he never recovered. She even started writing threatening letters to my mum. My parents have always been good friends ever since they divorced, and it all culminated with a letter from the authorities. A letter accusing my dad of being a child molester. I still vividly remember how Mum sat us down in our room, holding the letter, a deep look of concern on her face, asking if Dad had ever touched us inappropriately, which of course he never had. It later turned out it was Rachel who had falsely accused him in such an attempt to prevent him from seeing us. I remember feeling really angry and upset that she had gone to such lengths. The last memory I have of Rachel was a few weeks before Christmas. We were staying at my dad's place over the weekend. It was a 2-story apartment complex with a large window spanning an entire wall floor to ceiling. It was in the living room, where we had just sat down to watch TV. Next to the window there was a glass door leading onto a stone patio, bordering a lawn that ended with a tall hedge. And on this particular day the outdoor lights had been switched off, which meant it was pitch black outside, as the intro to Superman started playing. A while into the episode, I suddenly heard a strange, sharp noise coming from the window. It sounded like something was clawing on the glass in an attempt to get in. The sofa I was sitting on was placed right in front of the window, so I had my back towards it when I slowly turned around to look over my shoulder, heart thumping in my chest, hairs standing on the end as if I were being watched. But all that came into view was pitch black darkness lurking behind my own reflection. By this point, Dad had also heard the sound and gotten up to turn off the patio lights. When the outside suddenly flooded with light, I found myself staring into the face of a smiling blonde woman peering into our living room. Need I tell you I screamed? Both me and my sister flew up from the couch like it had been scorched with fire and ran behind our dad. When I looked towards the window again, I saw Rachel with both of her hands up against the glass, tightly cupped beside her face as she was trying to look inside. The patio door was right next to her. I tugged on Dad's shirt and whispered if the door was locked when she reached towards the handle. That millisecond of doubt flashing across my dad's face still haunts me to this day. Rachel truly looked like a madwoman as she furiously jerked on the handle in an attempt to get in, briefly pausing to peer through the glass now and again. I remember thinking Dad looked oddly calm as he ushered us around a corner wall, telling us to stay out of sight. As she walked towards the patio door, we begged him not to go outside, thinking she would have a knife hidden somewhere. So he opened up a small crack within the door, firmly holding onto the handle, and asking what the hell she was doing in his backyard. She tried to get him to let her in, putting on a big smile, tossing her hair, but Dad obviously wouldn't budge, telling her to leave or he would call the cops, to which she eventually conceded, leaving a bunch of Christmas presents behind. When Rachel was out of sight of the window, Dad went out to make sure she was gone, picking up what she had left behind on his way back. None of us wanted anything to do with the presents. Something just felt really off. So they ended up still fully wrapped in the trash. Later we joked there was a possibility of seeing a bomb inside, or perhaps something far more morbid. I'm glad we never got to find out. That wasn't the last time my dad heard from her, but it was the last time I personally saw her, and I'm glad that she was out of our life at this point. Her behavior was incredibly odd and disturbing, and we wanted nothing more to do with her. Who knows how bad things could have gotten, because she was seriously unhinged. I used to live with my great-aunt while working in the city where she lived. I paid her rent and helped around the house, and she lived alone. She'd been living by herself ever since her husband passed away from a heart attack, and later my cousin, her grandson, died in an accident. My brother would visit and stay the night if my great-aunt's health wasn't good. One night I came home late from work and tried to sleep, but I felt uneasy, as if someone was watching me, and I know it sounds cliché. To distract myself, I browsed my phone until I felt tired. Just as I was about to fall asleep, I saw my cousin walk into the room. It was the room he used to stay in before he passed. I jolted upright as he vanished. I tried to dismiss it as my imagination, and eventually managed to fall back asleep. And that night, I dreamt that my cousin was in the house trying to talk to me. But for some reason he couldn't. His accident scars were still visible. The next morning I told my brother, who had also stayed the night, about my experience, and he went pale and said he had a similar dream. Our cousin was trying to talk to him but couldn't. We were both freaked out and told our great aunt. To our shock, she said she had the exact same dream. None of us had any reason to lie, and we hadn't discussed my cousin beforehand. Later we realized that this dream was on the anniversary of his death, which we didn't remember until we checked the date the following day. We did some cleansing rituals after, but that was the experience that turned me into a believer. When I was around 8 or 9 years old, my parents decided to buy a fixer-upper house. It was an old place, a little bit run down, but full of potential, or so they thought. We didn't know anything about its history, and at first everything seemed ordinary. But about 2 weeks after we moved in, I started feeling uneasy, like someone was always watching me. This wasn't just a fleeting feeling, it was an intense and physical one. Whenever I felt that presence, it came with a sharp muscle cramp and a heavy pit in my stomach, like the sinking sensation you get when an elevator drops suddenly. I couldn't explain it, but it was like the air in the room grew colder, heavier. Things escalated a few weeks later. One night, my babysitter and I woke up hungry. We decided to sneak into the kitchen for some leftovers, trying not to wake our parents. The house was eerie quiet as we crept down the hallway, our footsteps barely making a sound on the creaky wooden floor. When we stepped into the kitchen, the air felt different, thick, almost oppressive. We had barely made it to the fridge when it happened. Plates flew off the counters and smashed against the walls and floor. It wasn't a slow tumble or a clumsy accident. They were hurled with force, as if thrown by unseen hands. My sister screamed and I froze, too terrified to move. We ran back to our room and huddled together under the blankets, shaking. The next morning we told our parents what had happened, but they didn't believe us. They brushed it off, saying we must have been sleepwalking and accidentally knocked the plates over. No matter how much we insisted that that wasn't the case, they wouldn't listen. After that night, the strange occurrences only got worse. Doors would creak open on their own, even when there was no breeze. Shadows moved in the corners of our vision, and I'd often wake up to the feeling of someone standing at the foot of my bed, though no one was there when I turned on the light. The oppressive presence in the house became a constant. It felt like it was watching us, feeding from our fear. My parents tried to rationalize everything, but deep down, I think they felt it too. When the day finally came for us to move out, I couldn't have been more relieved. As we drove away for the last time, I felt the weight lift from my chest. Whatever had haunted that house stayed behind, and I've never felt anything like it since. I have lived in this house for about 8 years, and during that time I've had countless experiences that feel undeniably paranormal. While I've tried to rationalize some of them, others defy explanation and leave me questioning what's really going on here. One of the most unsettling events happened a few years ago. My friend was visiting and we were bored, so we decided to play hide and seek. My house sits on a large property, with plenty of nooks and crannies to hide in, making it perfect for the game. My friend volunteered to be the seeker, while my brother and I found hiding spots. I squeezed myself into a cupboard, while my brother hid behind the garage outside. It didn't take long for my friend to find my brother, and together they started searching for me. At one point, they noticed a shadow moving in the laundry room and assumed it had to be me. My friend approached the laundry door and reached for the handle. But as he tried to open it, he felt a strong force pushing back against him, preventing the door from being opened. What made it even stranger was that all the doors leading outside were closed, and the laundry room doesn't have any windows. We were home alone, and there was no one else in the house who could have been responsible. When they finally managed to open the door, the room was empty. That wasn't the only strange thing about living in this house. There's always an uncomfortable atmosphere, especially in certain rooms, even with the windows open. The air feels heavy, almost suffocating. I sweat excessively here, even in the middle of winter, which doesn't happen anywhere else. And there are the sounds, voices murmuring just out of earshot, like someone having a conversation in the next room. Loud banging noises echoing throughout the house at random times. These noises seem to come from nowhere and happen even when I'm alone. One of the most disturbing experiences happened when I was younger. I was in bed late at night around midnight, and the rest of my family was fast asleep. Out of nowhere, I started hearing loud thuds and what sounds like drilling noises coming from beneath my bed. My heart was racing as I worked up the courage to look under the bed. When I checked, there was nothing there. My room is on the second floor, so the sound couldn't have been coming from beneath the floorboards either. I thought maybe it was coming from downstairs, but there was nothing unusual when I checked the next day. Another strange thing is waking up with an unexplained mark on my body, usually my stomach. They aren't deep or painful, but I can't figure out how they got there. At first, I thought they might be from the way I was sleeping, but it keeps happening, even when I make sure to lie comfortably. I can't shake the feeling that something or someone unseen is sharing this space with me. I don't know if these spirits or entities are friendly, neutral, or something else entirely. I've considered recording an investigation, but I don't know where to start. If anyone has any advice or what to do, whether it's understanding the spirit's intentions or trying to figure out how to deal with them, I'd appreciate any help. Should I try to communicate with them, or will it only make things worse? This all started when a close friend of mine began exhibiting very odd behavior. Although he'd always been a good friend, something was dramatically changing in him. Intrigued and concerned, I asked him to try and understand what was going on. It was during that conversation that he revealed he was involved in a cult, which explained his behavior and his lack of sleep, due to the frequent meetings that happened in the early hours. As my friend shared more details about the cult's activities, my curiosity grew. He suggested the possibility of joining to experience everything for myself, and being quite curious, I accepted the offer, without fully understanding the hole I was getting myself into. My friend asked if I was sure, and I said I was. He then took his phone and called someone from the cult to ask if he could bring a potential member. After exchanging a few words, he told me there would be a meeting the following night for them to see me and make a decision. That night, we headed out to a place outside the city. Imagine we were on the road left of the city, and before reaching the next, there, in the middle of nowhere, we took a dirt road and traveled a while until reaching a place that left me astonished. It was what appeared to be a giant sanctuary, more ostentatious than the city's cathedral. I entered and was met with images of demons, names like Beelzebub and Lucifer adorned the walls. I was taken to a room where I underwent what seemed to be an intense interrogation, questions about my reasons for joining, if I was already in another cult, and if I was a devotee of death. I answered honestly, explaining that my only motive was curiosity, and after the extensive interrogation I left the room, and my friend continued to show me around. It was a somber, imposing and disconcerting environment. The members gathered again and communicated that I would be accepted into the community, or as they preferred to call it, the church, but obviously it was a cult. It wasn't before long that vehicles of all kinds began arriving. Vans, cars, a limo. It was a strange sight. I was expecting to see people in black hoods and scenes worthy of a movie, but it was nothing like that. These were just regular people coming to participate in the event. We had dinner, and at the end, my friend took me back home and told me there would be another meeting in 2 days. Over the months, my friend explained to me about the internal structure and activities. I discovered there were different ranks and that practices were divided by stages. Throughout the years I attended that place, I witnessed and lived experiences that I consider unbearable for many. To avoid dragging on too long, I'll start with rituals that we might consider mild, such as animal sacrifices. I won't go into the specific details, as they were quite strange, but there were sacrifices of chickens and goats and other animals as part of the activities we carried out. One of the questions I asked myself within the sect was the reason for such sacrifices, to which I was informed that each entity had its own form of worship. Some required sacrifices, others just demanded blood, and some others accepted more common offerings like money. For example, there was a figure of Santa Muerte, associated with abundance and the absence of evil, where people usually left money as an offering. And over the years I gradually moved up in level. Each year I learned new practices and rituals. The cult had values that indeed differed from many commandments of the more conventional churches. Throughout my journey I met masters who, unlike leaders, were tasked with teaching and guiding. On one occasion, around 5 or 6 members, including myself, had an option presented to undergo certain intensive rituals for a year and a half to prepare for what they called the Great Revelation. We all said yes, of course. The process was very intense, and I'm not proud of what I'm about to say, but I participated in a human sacrifice. It wasn't pleasant. The year and a half passed, and they told us that we were taken to the very important ceremony that which we'd been preparing. We went to the furthest part of the temple, one in which I'd never been. Upon entering, we found a room. It was kind of a trapdoor in the floor that led to stairs taking us down to a cave. After walking for a small while, we arrived at what seemed to be an arch, 2 wooden pillars joined by bones at the top. There were no doors, which I found odd, because I would understand placing such decorations on a door, but just standing there was a bit odd. There was no visible difference between being on one side or the other. It was a cave. The only thing on both sides was rock. We reached the arch and were given special robes with a symbol on, and then crossed underneath. As we continued walking, one of the people guiding us clarified that upon reaching my designated place, we were absolutely prohibited from speaking and could not make any noise with our mouths. When we reached the end of the cave, there was an old worn-out chair, and around it were things that screamed atrocities. Children's clothes and other details that I wish I had never seen. And behind the chair, carved into the rock, was the Star of David. We were told the fact that we were there indicated that we understood the purpose of that chair, and that if we wanted to take the next step, we had to commit to procuring a sacrifice each year. It was at that moment, disgusted, that I wanted to run away. I knew perfectly well what happened to people who left the sect, and yes, those who hadn't seen what I had seen ended very badly. I didn't even want to imagine what they would do to me if I said I didn't want to continue. Easy sacrifice, I suppose. So, like everyone else, I committed to fulfilling what they were asking. And to formalize the commitment, we made a small blood pact, and then began our journey back. Upon exiting the cave and arriving at the main hall of the temple, that is, the dining room, the highest-ranking members of the cult were waiting for us. They congratulated us, we had dinner, and everyone went home. Seeing what I saw left me unable to sleep for around 3 days, until I just passed out from exhaustion. I couldn't accept what had happened, and I was determined to distance myself from the cult, but I didn't know how. I knew I couldn't abruptly leave, but what I could do was find a way out to gradually distance myself in a friendly manner and without raising suspicion. What I had to do was find a way for my job to transfer me, and then I spoke to the cult to tell them I would be moving and working in another state. In this way, I wasn't running away. Keep in mind that even being far from the cult, I had to continue attending the temple for over a year. But what I did was space out the time between visits, until I just stopped going back altogether. There was no reprisal against me because I didn't leave abruptly but gradually, so it didn't seem like I was trying to flee. I suspect that's why I'm still alive. It's assumed that I'm still a part of the sect because I never officially left. I just haven't met up with them for the past 8 years. And honestly, I think it's better that way. In 2012, my then boyfriend's parents purchased a house, and we moved in with them. I had been living with them all in an apartment prior to this for about a year, and all was well. The day of moving in, his mum suddenly turned against me, taking something I had said entirely out of context and adding onto it. Her husband and son didn't believe her, and she still, to my knowledge, holds a grudge about this particular event. This would be a repeating event for all 3 of us concerning her. He and I got married the following year. The next several years, his mum would continue claiming I said things and started retaliating against me in progressively worse ways. One day I came home and discovered something that was the final straw. Now, I don't want to get into too much detail here, but we ended up moving out on our own in 2017 due to this particular event. And things got a bit better for everyone involved, until October of 2021. She claimed she saw people in the backyard messing with our classic cars. Police ended up being called and it turned into a big mess. We attributed it to some of the medication she was on. It worsened over the following months, to the point where she was now saying she heard voices and seeing people in different rooms of the house, notably the master bedroom and dining area/kitchen. There was a death in that family that resulted in my in-laws needing to move across the country, and my husband and I bought the house from them in May of 2023. Over the last year, our marriage struggled. There were various pressures which resulted in both of us drinking excessively, mine having started to get better after a traumatic event in 2020, and we spiraled. The events are as follows. My computer was set up in the master bedroom in a corner desk. There were many times I would go to turn the light on because I had this spooky feeling of something staring at the back of my head. The feeling didn't really go away, but the light made me feel better. I was gaming one day and heard this low, almost growling laugh from the closet on the far wall to the right. I'm talking about the stereotypical evil Tim Curry chortle that sent chills down my spine and is ingrained in the back of my brain. It just lives there rent-free like a monster under a child's bed. I would go to the bathroom and hear low, mumbling talking like it was coming up through the vent. I wondered at times if someone was living in the crawl space. This fear was compounded by the fact that the crawl space vents on the outside front of my home would sometimes be pushed out lying on the ground. This was an almost everyday occurrence. I'd come home and on the ground, they were there. We put this off as a raccoon or other critter because it was way too small for a human to fit into. The crawlspace entry is padlocked. I had a small LED motion detector light in my closet, as the original hardware had failed. I'd be laying in bed at night, and the light would come on at random in the closed closet. No airflow to move clothes. I wouldn't even think the motion detector would be able to see clothes move anyway, but who knows on that one. I just turned it off, and when I needed it after several weeks of this, as it had no pattern and would happen after a few days of nothing. I heard a lot of voices while drinking and partaking in some novelty Delta 8s. I was a heavy drinker, and Delta Vapor through a lot of 21 while I dealt with personal issues, but I never had a problem with auditory hallucinations prior to living here, and have not had problems since leaving this house. But on Christmas Day, my husband attempted to chase whatever it was out of the house. I had left, so I don't know at all what he did besides sage the home. He claimed whatever it was demonic. I am hesitant to use that word, as there were a lot of things I witnessed that I never told him about. I wonder sometimes if he had other things happen but he never told me. I ended up separating from my now soon-to-be ex-husband at the beginning of the year. We were both dealing with a lot of stuff and the house seemed to make it worse. It definitely got worse at night. We would go out, have an amazing day and come back home, and the entire mood would fall apart. We've had numerous items go missing, little things like vapes or remotes. Some items would pop back up, others are still MIA. I've seen shadows move from the dining room to the kitchen, and we've had things get knocked off into the sink or off the counters. The feeling of being watched while in the shower was also only a feeling I felt in that particular house. My ex also said he's felt similar. Since January, we've been moving our things out of the house. Neither one of us are currently living there. Back in June, I went to get my computer after an odd event regarding the doors of the house. The front glass doors had been locked, while the back screen door was wide open. My neighbor brought up he was concerned about the screen door, as we had always kept it closed and never had issues with it being blown open due to weather. My friend I'm currently living with had come to help me move things that night because I was already uneasy about being alone in the house. We had already loaded up the computer, and I was in the process of dismantling my corner desk. He stepped out for a cigarette, and while I was undoing these fantastically frustrating IKEA locks on the desk, I heard a muffled but very audible male voice say, "Hey." It freaked me out, so I skedaddled outside and asked said friend if he had called for me. He looked confused and denied it. It still gives me goosebumps when I think about it. Every time my ex and I are over there, the feeling the house exudes is dread. I'm tense and tightly wound. I have to go over tomorrow morning and enlist a few close friends to go with me so I'm not alone. I refuse to be there alone. I don't scare easy, and even my ex has admitted he has severe discomfort about being there by himself. I was desperate enough to have someone go over there. I debated on calling the non-emergency line to have an officer oversee the situation. My in-laws both had issues regarding their marriage while living in the house. My mother-in-law even attempted to take her own life. The issues went away after they moved out, and apparently have been doing great since, though she still loathes me. My ex and I have also been doing better in our now separate lives. He said his depression is pretty much completely gone, as is mine. Even our dogs are doing better. We knew the previous owner was a bitter old man. I'm sure I could find his name somewhere if I looked. Find if he's passed away or not. But I'm at a loss on what to do in the meantime of moving out before the end of the year. There's a part of me that just wants to get a spirit box or throwaway board just to see, as is human curiosity. I've seen some wild things over the years, having volunteered closely with a local mental facility known to be haunted, and even currently working somewhere where a lot of us have some stories, particularly those on the night shift. This is the first time I've actually felt fear. Human ghost or whatever it is, I don't like it. I'm looking for advice. Any would be appreciated. I've been sitting alone at home all day due to a storm, and I think I'm finally ready to speak about my experience with a girl I met in college. To preface, I, a 23-year-old female, was 19 at the time, going on 20 at the time of meeting this girl. I was also in an unstable and codependent relationship at the time, and was utterly depressed, naive, and craving a sense of validation of my thoughts and feelings that no one around me at the time was willing to give me. So subsequently, I was the perfect candidate to inflate and dote upon the literal god-complexed ego of this one girl. I was in an acting 101 class my first semester of college, and swore to myself that I wouldn't make friends in the 2 years I was set to be there, as this was community college. I was to go in, get good grades, and leave. It wasn't until the third day, a week and a half since the semester started, and this girl walked in, and you could feel the air in the room grow thin. Her presence was both alluring and yet annoying at the same time. Charisma seemed to ooze out of her pores and shine like a halo from her hair. I'm from the US, and when this girl began to speak with a British accent, everyone was confused but intrigued. Apparently she had just gotten here from a trip back to England with her father. Apparently she was originally from there. That's when my first instinct rang clear. Why is that, if she had enough money to be flying to and from England? She was doing acting 101 class at a community college. I decided my curiosity was too frivolous and kept it to myself. Until the next class, when she asked me a question. I don't remember what the question was, but I do remember my initial disgust with her demeanor. She seemed too bubbly, too poised. Something was just off. After that brief encounter, I felt that's all I'd ever hear from her. However, slowly, she would make remarks to me during the class, and eventually I started striking conversation as well. One day after class, she mentions to me how expensive and annoying it was that she has to wait for an Uber every time class ends. I remember offering her a ride home as an alternative, but she would dramatically decline, saying things like how her parents would get angry with her for burdening me with a task of driving her around. I understood and felt pity on her after that. At that moment, I thought that she was in a household where her parents were overbearing and slightly abusive, so I decided I would try and befriend her outside of class. She seemed nice enough. I also had this pang in my heart to help her for some reason, and that was exactly what she wanted. So over time, as we grew closer, I would offer her a ride home. I would insist and say that I am her friend, and that friends help each other out. She seemed to enjoy these gestures. She'd compliment me, and then go on to say how tough her life is without a license. Eventually, she agreed, and I took her home. It was honestly really nice to have someone to talk to about class outside of class. Soon enough, after driving her home the past few classes, she invited me in for tea. I thought it was adorable, having afternoon tea and gossiping with a friend. She was British after all. We both eventually opened up about ourselves and spoke on things beside class. She told me she was my age, she graduated the same year as me, and also that she took a gap year. She said throughout school she'd traveled to and from England, and I found it fascinating. She was adopted from a third world country, brought to England, and then moved to her current town when she was 6. She told me about past relationships, and I opened up about mine. She always seemed to be the same as me, like she was trying to emulate me in a subtle way. It was difficult to take notice at first. If I would talk to her about the apprehension I felt in my current relationship, she would sympathize, and tell a story about how her ex hurt her even worse. I would always take note of the things she said, because I was not only her friend, but we seemed to share the same experiences. However, hers were always far more severe than mine. In hindsight, I know why it was like that, but at the time I just thought about how unlucky this girl was, and how bad I felt for her past. Soon it became a tradition to drink tea at her house after class, but I had to be up before her mum got home, and if I were to meet her it would be bad. One day her mum got home early, and was surprised yet delighted to see me. She introduced herself, and I did the same, all while my friend sat and sulked in anger. Her mother seemed delighted, and I was surprised at how welcoming she was. She offered me food and gave me some crackers to take home, and eventually I confronted my friend, asking her why she would paint her mother to be that way. She said she was just kinder to guests than her. I was confused, but also fully understood. I have a mother who is very similar to that, so I shook it off. One day in class we get our midterm assignments. We were to prepare a non-verbal monologue in front of the class. We each get our assigned stage directions and are asked to prepare it for 2 weeks. One of the stage directions was that a girl comes home crying after having been sexually assaulted. Another girl in our class received this one, but was uncomfortable doing it, and rightly so. A boy in that class criticized her for not wanting to do it, and she ran out of the class. My friend and I followed her. The three of us opened up about our past assaults and eventually calmed our classmate down. Time passed after that class, and a few classes later, when I was walking with my friend to my car, she all of a sudden ran away from me. I followed her, and I'm laughing at her. She had fallen ungracefully to the ground and was in the grass on her knees. I asked her what she was doing, asked why she was being a weirdo. What she did was related to our conversations. She looks up at me with some kind of strange fear in her eyes and says that she just saw her assaulter just then on campus. I was shaken at this point because I don't remember seeing anyone walk anywhere near us. She said he walked by and stared at her, evilly. I was confused and said she must have imagined it, but she was adamant. I was also even more confused because she had told me she had filed a restraining order against him. How could he be allowed on campus? If he really wanted to go to the same school, there were 2 campuses in different towns. Surely he would have been assigned to the other one. I asked all these questions and was met with little answer. Obviously. She said she talked to her mother and handled it accordingly. It took weeks to even hear about anything. I wanted her to bring it up, but she never did. So eventually I asked, and she gave me a story about how she went to the dean's office after class and fixed things. I remember being quite confused by this, because after all, I had driven her home after every one of our classes. She said that they went after I left, but that couldn't have been, because the school offices closed after 5, and I would always leave at 5. Many of my questions were met with strange excuses, but I remember just letting it go. This was a sore subject after all, and I didn't want to upset her any more than she already was. Weeks pass, and my friend and I eventually become inseparable. We seem to know the ins and outs of each other. We even hosted a Friendsgiving together at her house with some of the people from our acting class. Then, as the end of the semester came, I could feel the rift grow between us. I was confused and hurting. She said she wasn't going for a degree and was just there to take the acting class. I remember being quite befuddled. I thought she was a theatre major like me. She had said she was, but I guess she changed her mind. She said that she would be auditioning for Lambda, New York City early the next year, and she was probably going to get in and never see me again. I remember being stunned. Why didn't she tell me this sooner? Why did she even get close to me in the semester then? Then I thought about how it was probably my fault. I pushed her to be my friend, but I felt so bad for her It was like she was asking for a friend without telling me. Eventually, I convinced her it would be good for her to be in a class with me again the next semester, partially because I wanted to be selfish and keep her close, and the other part because I knew from what she told me that if she never got into Lambda, she'd probably take her own life. I feared for my friend so much that I wanted to push her to be in the class with me, because she had somehow made me believe that I would be helping her not take her life. So she signed up for the class and decided to audition with me for the spring musical. But she wasn't to go with me, because she auditioned alone and couldn't talk to anyone before she sang, which I guess was understandable. Soon her audition for Lambda rolls around, and I managed to go with her and her parents for the weekend. NYC is about an afternoon train ride away, and her parents were kind enough to pay for my ticket. How I managed to be invited was by her telling me how scared and terrified she was to be with her parents on this trip. So I offered to come, to be a buffer between her and her parents' evil ways. I was met with polite no's, and eventually, just like all my offers, I was finally met with a yes. Besides, I love NYC, and when I learnt I didn't have to pay, I was even more excited. Now, for those of you who have listened this far, I want you to understand if you haven't already. It wasn't like I was begging this girl to let me do anything for her. She'd answer me in a way that made things seem like I had to insist. Like if I didn't ask again, she would be hurt and it would be my fault. In other, simpler words, I was being manipulated into doing things for her. But it never felt like it, because I meant it. I was much more generous to friends I had met at the time then. So I arrived at Grand Central Station and was met with my friend and her mother. We walked to the hotel and everything seemed normal. We go to sleep, I wake up, and in all honesty, all I remember about that trip was how scared I was of this new virus going around. This was January 2020 after all. Surprisingly, her parents seemed to be angels. I remember going shopping with them, and they were always talking about how my friend would like this, and how they wanted to make sure my friend would be happy, etc. All her parents talked about was her. I was floored. I remember her telling me to stay in the room all day, ignore her parents, but I didn't want to. I now see why. Eventually, we made it to the New York Public Library. I remember going to the top floor, taking a picture of the painted ceiling, and standing for about a minute. And then her parents found me, and said they had to go meet my friend right now. She was in need of some cherry-colored chapstick and some water. They told me to stay, and that they'd meet me later and to explore the city. I said absolutely not. I wasn't walking around alone. I went with them, and I witnessed their panic as they tried to hurry her to her audition and find water and the right chapstick. All the while, my friend is texting them exactly what she wants and telling them to hurry. We walked about 20 minutes to this building. My parents wouldn't even come down the stairs to tell me something, let alone walk that far to bring me water and a chapstick. They decided too that it would take too much time to get a cherry-colored chapstick, and my friend would just have to use a plain one from her mum's purse. We get to the building and meet with her in the lobby. She goes to her parents and sees they have no cherry chapstick, and it's not the right water. She's furious. She gets mad and just storms into the audition room, never saying thank you. After that, we go and sit in a Panera Bread and wait for another 20 minutes. Eventually, she gets out of her audition and meets us inside. She then was adamant on alienating me from her parents and only wanted to talk to me about her audition. She tells me this story and I can't help but think she's lying about it all. It just seemed so bizarre. But I don't remember the details. I just remember after the story I told her about my day with her parents, and she was very upset for me spending my time with them. She scolded me and asked them what we talked about over and over again for the rest of our trip. And we went to sleep and left the next day. I remember being quite weirded out with my friend after the trip. She seemed to be a lot more abrasive with me afterwards, and adamant on me not speaking with her parents. Eventually I learned that the name she had told me she had was actually not her legal name. Eventually, I saw that she had a high school diploma from 2019, not 2018. I asked her about it and she said she just got a misprint. The misprint turned into her graduating late because she was in the mental hospital a lot. She went to mental health programs but also traveled back and forth to England, but also went to school 2 days a week her senior year. She said she did her senior year twice. She only lived in England when she was a child, and she actually lived in England most of her life. Nothing was adding up. All the stories she'd eventually tell me never made sense together. I remember half-jokingly asking her to write up a timeline of her life because things never added up. Still, despite the inconsistencies, I kept her as a friend. The lies were just far apart from one another to make me feel like I was the one who was wrong. The cognitive dissonance was growing in my mind, and this was just the beginning. Now, before I met my friend, I had begun to practice the Wiccan religion. I was a solitary Wiccan who lived by the reed, and you harm none, do what you will. I was actively practicing altruism as a form of devotion to the Wiccan moon goddess and horned god. My friend, coincidentally, was also a practicing Wiccan. We had done full moon rituals together, and she seemed to lower not more than I did. So I usually followed her lead when it came to rituals. They started out tame, making a candle manifestation wish outside, sitting under the moonlight meditating together. We make our wishes out loud, thus getting to know each other's deepest desires. We were very emotionally vulnerable in these moments together, and after our rituals, we try all kinds of divination and spiritual practices. One full moon just before I had to leave, I asked my friend to do a tarot reading for me on my love line. I had just recently had a fight with my then boyfriend and wanted to know what she saw. My friend seemed to have all the answers about my life when it came to divination, and I was trusting of her enough to hear her out. She started pulling cards and reading the description. Every single card she pulled was a bad one. It said we'd end up in a failure, hardship, despair, and that I had to leave him ASAP. I remember wanting to know, but I didn't know how. I left that night crying over how horrible that card reading went. To jump back into the timeline, after we started our second semester classes, I remember opening up to some other classmates that my friends and I were witches. I did it in a way to offer spells for help, but my friend was mad at me for ousting us. She never wanted them to know what we did. I was confused but wanted to help others and invite them into our little world that I loved so much. But my friend seemed to see it differently, so I respected her boundaries and never brought it up to others again. Eventually, as I know all of you have guessed, the pandemic started in March 2020. Classes were moved online, and so was our friendship. We would FaceTime almost every day and watch movies while on call. Now at my college, the musical was cast before lockdown, and I unfortunately didn't get in, but my friend did. She met all the other theatre majors and started talking to them in their Discord chat during the pandemic. I was never brought into that circle by her until the summer of 2020. And during that time, and even before lockdown, my friend would try to date the boys in the department, and even grew an obsession with 2 of them. She had told the first one, who I'm actually dating now, that she was friends with his favorite Broadway star, and that she'd have them meet. He never believed her. After he turned her down, she became angry, and started a rumor that he was actually gay. After that, she moved on to another guy, who had a girlfriend at the time. She was even more obsessed with him. She enjoyed the chase. The fact that he was her friend and stayed up late and spoke to her all night made her so happy. He had opened up to me and said she was never the only one he spoke to, and that he was just a night owl because of his job, and she'd just be one of the people he spoke to. During the course of the 2 months during lockdown, and when people began to feel a bit more comfortable, my friend and I had talked about her maybe moving into my house. Now I have a large room in my parents' basement, and my friend was beginning to scare me with her talks. Her parents are awful to her when she's home with them. I have also yet to mention that she had an older brother with a form of autism among other issues, and she talked about how mean he was to her. She's constantly calling me to say she was going to take her life, and I was terrified and decided to open my home to her. This was the worst but best mistake I ever made. Worse because of the escalation of our friendship, but best because it really had me realize how awful and manipulative she truly was. She moved in with me and everything was great. It was nice to be with someone who I considered to be a best friend. It was like a never-ending sleepover. I had a spare bed in my room at the time, and she used that for a while until she brought her mattress in, and eventually moved almost all her belongings in. Everything she had reeked. It smelled of BO, and when she lived there she never showered. She'd stay here 5 days a week and 2 at her house, and refused to use our showers and never changed her clothes. She would just sit on one side of my room and rot for days, only getting up to use the bathroom and pick up DoorDash. She'd eat on my side of the room and leave her mess for me to pick up. Eventually I brought a large trash barrel for us to use, and she'd fill it almost daily. I'd try to do moon rituals with her, and she wouldn't practice with me. I'd ask for a tarot reading and she just refused. However, the prophecies didn't stop. Instead of tarot readings, I'd get dream recalls. She'd tell me all these amazing dreams she'd had. They were prophetic dreams brought to her by the goddess Aphrodite, who she claimed to work with and worship while I was outside doing my moon rituals. She'd tell me I'd be a famous actress, and I'd date a K-pop star. I'd see the world and be an amazing celebrity. Obviously I didn't believe her at first, but she'd tell her stories in such a way that it gave me a glimmer of hope. Hope that my hard work would actually pay off. She had the guidance of Aphrodite on her side delivering all these messages after all. I wanted to believe her so badly that I shoved all logic aside to cling to the future reality she was feeding me. And I was no longer in a sad and crumbling relationship. I would be cast to shows. I'd be happy one day. And that was all I truly ever wanted. Soon during that summer, my friend would have another friend over. But this girl was more her friend than mine. Eventually, however, my friend began to actively try to keep us from seeing each other. But it never really worked because eventually me and this other girl became close. We would even work out together in my room while my friend sulked in the corner, eyes closed, listening to music and ignoring us every time we invited her to join. Around that time, my friend had a boy she was obsessed with over. Now, this isn't my story to tell, and despite the anonymity, I just don't feel comfortable sharing the exact details of this boy's encounter with my friend. But what happened was later told to me by this boy, as it was on a night I was out at my then-boyfriend's house. This incident happened in my bedroom, and its details still haunt me to this day. Though rest assured, nothing too horrible escalated, but if it wasn't for some sort of intervening that I can't remember the details of, I don't know what my friend would have done to him. I remember after that night, despite not knowing what had happened, my friend grew even more malicious towards me. She began to sow the seeds of fear of the Greek gods in me, saying they were angry with me, and that was why I was having bad days. That was why my boyfriend and I were always fighting. I was always doing things wrong, and it was driving me wild that I didn't know what it was exactly. All I knew is that I was upsetting the powers above by just existing, and that my life was currently a mess. So one night, one desperate and hollow night, I asked my friend again about my future and what I was doing wrong. She looks at me and said, "Do you want it from me or Aphrodite?" I looked at her and said, "Aphrodite." My friend enters a meditative state and then looks at me in an evil, sadistic way. Her demeanor changed entirely. I've never seen and yet to see anything quite like it. I was told the reason why I was having such horrible days was because I had to break up with my then boyfriend. I had to do it soon, or nothing else in my life would become true. No fame, no happiness, no success. If I didn't do it by the next full moon, my life would be stagnant. I'd amount to nothing. It was so convincing. I can still feel the primal fear I felt right then and there. My friend took the bracelet I had been wearing that was from my boyfriend and held it. She told me, still through the persona of Aphrodite, that I was being held down by it and had to rid myself of it and my boyfriend once and for all, and soon. I was tasked to toss it in a lake an hour away, and to do it with my only friend. but I had to break up with my boyfriend first before ridding myself of the cursed bracelet. I was stunned. I didn't know what to feel. My friend left the so-called trance and never recalled a thing. I told her about the encounter, how scared I was, the fear of being smited, of disobeying an ancient deity. She told me that I never had to do it. I think it was because she was scared of what she had done to me. Maybe she thought she'd gone too far. Or maybe it was all just part of an act to make me do what she wanted. I'm not entirely sure, but I was adamant on leaving my then boyfriend. I'd worked up the courage and did it a few days later, but everything still felt off. A few days later, we drove with another friend of mine up to the lake. I invited that friend because I was scared to just go with my manipulative friend. I remember her being angry with me for inviting this other girl, but I didn't care. I knew something was off and needed there to be more people. And I'm so glad for it because I'm not sure what would have happened to me. We were entirely off the grid when we got there. The GPS stopped working 15 minutes before we got to the lake, and we got lost trying to leave. It was truly a surreal experience, and me and that other friend never fully felt safe the entire trip. And my evil friend was all too calm. After that, my friend moved out. I remember we got into a fight. It was a fight where she got mad at me for missing my ex. She had wanted me to cuddle her, and I wasn't comfortable with it, so she went back to her side of the room and sulked, wanting me to beg for her to come back, but I never did. We just went to sleep. The next day, I went to go speak to my ex about our breakup, finalizing things and giving things back. I came home to my friend, pretend sleeping. She was laying in the dark, smiling. I told her to cut the crap and talk to me. I explained where I was, and she said she knew that my mum told her. We talked about how she was not getting better. She was cutting herself again and wasn't eating and just lumping all day. She made excuses when I tried to help her change her habits. I was worried, but every time I voiced my concern, I was met with excuses and blame for being concerned. So a few days later, she told me that she'd never change and that I'd have to live with her the way she was. At that time, she adopted having been diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder and claimed to have always had it. I didn't believe her, because she only started saying she had it after watching a Netflix K-drama about a woman with the same diagnosis. I was finally starting to piece together all the lies. I found out a little before our fight that she was actually a year younger than me, having seen her ID. She explained the reason that was because her parents changed her birthday after she was adopted because they wanted a younger baby. She accused her parents of committing forgery. I wanted to take action, but she never did because it was a lie. Her chosen name was also a lie. She told me so many stories about the reason why she went by a different name after I found out her given name. Her accent was fake. She had never even lived in England. I believe she made that up after the trip she went on right before classes. I finally saw that everything was a lie. When she moved out, she left all her belongings at my house, so my sister and I packed up her stuff and took it to hers. She told me she wasn't home and couldn't help us, and that she needed to get adult diapers for her dying grandma. She also said I wasn't allowed to bring her things inside and to just leave it in her mudroom. After we had packed everything in there, my friend walks out from her backyard dressed in the fanciest outfit I've yet to see her in and gets into a car with the boy she was obsessed with, completely ignoring me and my sister. She never even said thank you. I was furious. I housed this girl, cooked her meals if she never ate, listened to her. I did everything in my power to care for her. And all I got was a massive screw you, and my life is in shambles. I tried confronting her on her lie and was met with countless, inconsistent and self-deprecating excuses. So I just gave up and never spoke to her again. She blocked me on everything after that and never spoke to anyone from my college again. She's gone from social media as well. All accounts were changed or deactivated. To conclude, I eventually got back together with that boyfriend and recently broke up with him on my own terms. I just wasn't ready to let go at that time. I still practice witchcraft, just not Wicca, and I'm much more educated now than I was 3 years ago. I have a new boyfriend, and I'm also best friends with the other girl who my evil friend introduced me to. I have my associate's degree in theatre arts, and have done a lot of work in my 1 year for my local theatre community. I plan to move to New York City this summer. My life is amazing now, and I have that friend among others out of my life. I still at times blame myself for being so naive and trusting, and I blame myself for the hurt I caused and how everything happened. I'm much more guarded now, but also a lot more headstrong. I also haven't made a new friend since, but I'm currently okay with that. There are many lies she told me that I eventually figured out were lies, but that would just be too much to share. And honestly, I don't remember the timeline too clearly. Anyway, thank you for hearing this. Just be cautious around others, as people can be full of crap. So, to my ex-best friend, let's never meet again. I was living at my mum's house with her, my dog, my sister, and my youngest son, who wasn't even walking yet. The house was a 3-level home, and from the moment I moved in there was an unsettling vibe. Strange things would happen regularly, and there was a constant oppressive feeling of being watched, especially when you were in the house alone or on one of the floors by yourself. It started subtly. I'd hear footsteps outside my bedroom door, slow and deliberate, even when I knew no one was home. Once, while sitting alone in my room, I felt the distinct sensation of someone lightly touching the back of my head. It wasn't imagined. It was real enough to send chills down my spine. The experiences weren't isolated to me. My sister once told me that she had stayed in my room while I was away at college and had the most horrifying encounter. She said she was assaulted by an unseen entity and described hearing it whisper in her ear saying, "Yeasty infection." To this day I have no idea what it meant or if it was somehow referencing a yeast infection she may have had. It was so bizarre and disturbing that it became one of the strangest moments tied to that house. But my scariest experience happened in the upstairs bathroom. My mum had just finished showering and I went in after her. The mirror was still fogged up from the steam, but there was something written on it. The words, "Help me," were scrawled across the glass in large clear letters. My heart dropped. I froze for a moment, staring at the words before panic set in. I rushed out of the bathroom, tears streaming down my face, and confronted my mum. "Did you write that on the mirror?" I asked her, almost pleading for a rational explanation. She looked genuinely confused and swore she hadn't. I couldn't shake the eerie feeling, and for years, it haunted me. 3 years later, I brought it up again, hoping maybe she'd confess to playing some kind of prank. But her answer remained the same. She hadn't written it. The bathroom mirror wasn't the only odd occurrence. On several occasions, we found dirty, baby-sized handprints on the same mirror. At first, my mum assumed I had placed my son's hands on the mirror while playing, but I knew I hadn't. My son couldn't even walk yet, let alone reach up to leave those prints. Years later, my mum admitted she'd also seen similar handprints on other surfaces, like the dining room table. She never had an explanation, but made us both wonder what kind of presence we had been living with at that house. Several years ago, I had a strange and unsettling experience that still lingers in my mind. It was a warm evening, and I was on the second-floor balcony with my cousin, just chatting and relaxing. We were in the middle of a casual conversation when out of nowhere, we both heard a loud, raspy male voice scream. It wasn't just a faint sound. It was as if the sound was coming from right between us, hovering in the air close enough that we could feel the tension of its presence. The voice itself had this unnatural, guttural quality to it, like something wasn't quite right. It was sharp and abrasive and sent immediate chills down our spines. Without missing a beat, we both turned to look at each other, eyes wide with shock. The realization dawned on us almost instantly. The sound hadn't come from any of our nearby neighbors. There were no speakers or devices that could have caused it. and no other logical explanation we could grasp. It was just there, something that didn't belong, something that neither of us could understand. We were both left standing there in stunned silence, processing what had just happened. Years later, I was talking to my cousin about that night, and I asked him if he remembered the incident, and without hesitation he replied he did, with a tone of recognition that almost seemed to echo my own disbelief. When I asked him if he could explain it, he went quiet for a moment, and then, almost uncomfortably, admitted he didn't want to discuss it further, but he confirmed without a doubt that it had happened exactly as I remembered it, with the same eerie voice and same lingering tension between us. This left me wondering, could there be any reason other than a mere prank to spook us for a laugh? Or was it something, perhaps, otherworldly? The voice wasn't just an ordinary sound, it felt like it had intention behind it, as if it was trying to communicate or perhaps provoke some kind of response. But why us? Why that moment? I've always been curious and unsettled as to what it could have been. For some context, my partner's family has always had some unsettling energy to it, one that I can't quite shake off. Over the time I've spent there, I've had several strange experiences that led me to believe the place might be haunted. There have been several moments where I've heard my name whispered directly in my ear, the voice so close that it felt like someone was standing right next to me, but when I turned around, no one was there. I've also seen dark, shadowy figures, often in the corner of my vision, that appeared too detailed and too real to be mere tricks of the light. At times it feels like I'm being watched, and the sensation can range from something that makes me feel anxious and on edge, to something oddly comforting and almost protective. It's like there's a presence that's been there for a long time, one that's aware of me. Recently, my partner has been experiencing some very strange occurrences themselves. This week they've been waking up at odd hours of the night, 2, 3, and 5 a.m., which is completely out of character for them. They're typically a super deep sleeper, so this sudden pattern of waking up at these exact times feels like something more than a coincidence. Last night, however, things escalated. They woke up to the sound of their bedroom door opening. This door has always been a bit sticky, so it makes a distinct creaking sound when it moves. At first, they thought it was their stepfather coming into the room, but when they look up, they saw someone standing in the doorway, an older man wearing a white shirt and blue jeans. The figure was blurry enough that they couldn't make out his face, but the outline was clear enough to give them the impression of a man entering the room. The door creaked as it closed behind him, and in that moment my partner felt a sense of confusion, thinking it was their stepfather. But then things took a bizarre turn. The older man didn't just stand there, he moved in an odd, almost unnatural way. He walked through the walls into the adjacent bedroom, their sister's room, and as he passed through the wall, the figure seemed to almost vaporize, disappearing into thin air, as if he wasn't entirely solid. It was like watching someone fade into the ether. Naturally, my partner's instinct was to check their phone, so they grabbed to turn on the flashlight, but when they looked around, there was nothing. The room was empty. The door was closed just as it had been before. The feeling of cold dread lingered, and they were left wondering if they had actually seen something, or if it was just a trick of the mind. While I'm less inclined to jump straight to the idea of sleep paralysis, or a sleep-related hallucination because my partner was moving around while this was happening, it's hard to ignore the feeling that something unexplainable was going on. Sleep paralysis typically involves being unable to move, but my partner was fully mobile during the experience, and the vividness of the figure they saw was different from what I've heard others describe when it comes to sleep paralysis demons. This felt more physical, more real. I'm curious to think what others can make of this. A few years ago, my family made the decision to admit me to a rehabilitation center due to problems with alcohol and other substances. My relatives made this decision because I had become uncontrollable. I had hit rock bottom several times, showing no intention of changing and moving forward with my life. I really wish I could tell you where this happened, but as you'll soon find out, I can't reveal the details. I can say that the center was in an old mansion on the outskirts of a city located on one of the several roads leading out of the state of Mexico. From the beginning, I noticed strange behavior among the patients and staff at the center. For example, at night you could hear several people walking through the hallways while murmuring. I understand that in a place of that nature, one must always be alert, especially at night, because the inmates could come up with anything. But having one person for every 2 rooms was enough, because the door was locked from the outside, so no inmate could leave their room during the night, which made it so strange to hear such movement in the hallway. Furthermore, once a month, very strange noises could be heard coming from an area off the center that no inmate could access. These noises lasted between 2:30 to 3:30. At first, it was extremely difficult for me to identify and differentiate the sounds because they were very far away, but it was like a mix of chanting, music, and I could even hear muffled screams. You know, like if someone's mouth was covered while they screamed. Obviously, the first few times I noticed strange things, I asked the center staff, but they always gave me ambiguous answers or simply did not respond, which is why I stopped asking. Another odd thing was that the inmates with the most severe cases, that is, those whose addictions were so strong that they ended up in the center to avoid jail, almost had no family, and those who did could not return to their families because they had exhausted them. So it could be said that those who were worse off had no life outside the center. Well, they had a kind of scar on their left wrist. It looked like a mark made by a razor blade, shaped like a small triangle with a dot in the middle. The fact that I had certain problems with addiction did not impede me from thinking clearly. It was obvious that it was too unlikely for all of them to have known each other before entering, and that for some reason they had made that mark on themselves. The most logical explanation was that they had done so inside the center. I tried to ask them about the marks, but the questions were always evaded, as if ashamed, or that it meant something bad. And so these little odd details that theoretically were not connected began to make me feel somewhat paranoid. My situation and behavior began to draw the attention of the center's staff, and their attitude towards me gradually started to change, to the point where I felt they were treating me with hostility. The moment I began to feel attacked was when the food they gave me had a strange taste. Not excessively, but I noticed it. It wasn't that it tasted bad, but it had a certain je ne sais quoi, a flavor that didn't belong there, and it happened with the juices and smoothies. The situation became unbearable when on one occasion I lost consciousness after drinking a juice. When I woke up, I found myself in a room in only my underwear. I was just starting to react when people wearing plastic animal masks entered. Being surrounded by masked individuals was the most terrifying moment of my life. I honestly thought they were going to do something horrible, especially because I was in underwear. But nothing did happen. What they did was hold me down and with a razor blade made the same symbol on me that I had seen on the other inmates, the triangle with a dot. After that, they sat me in front of a chair and a TV and tied me up so that I wouldn't look away from the screen, and began to play a series of impactful recordings. I don't mean what was shown was something very strong. The man, in fact, was only looking directly at the screen. The important thing was what the man said, because everything was done in such a way that it seemed like this person was talking directly to me. I guess the people at the center had everything well studied as to know how to hit low blows in the mind. I also guess they had different recordings for different types of people, because I don't believe the words that the man in the recording was saying would have had the same effect on someone with a very different life to mine. That recording broke me. It attacked my psyche, my behavior, my way of thinking, and it made me feel that everything bad that had happened to me was my fault, and that my life was a mess because I was a mess. I was looking at that screen for more than 12 hours, and I felt something inside my mind break. Every word that man said penetrated deeply into my brain. I guess that was the idea. They wanted to break me. And after that, they released me, gave me clothes, fed me, and let me sleep in my room. The next day, I didn't want to leave my room at all because I felt vulnerable. But in the early hours, they forcibly took me out and dragged me back to the room again. I couldn't scream because they covered my mouth, and as they dragged me, they tore my clothes until I was only in my underwear. They tied me to the same chair and replayed all the recordings, and so they kept me for 6 weeks. I don't remember much of what happened during that time because they were breaking my mind. In fact, the only reason I know it was 6 weeks was because every time they took me back to my room after being tied to that chair, I would make a mark on the wall to count the times they took me. In total, they took me 21 times in 6 weeks. During that month and a half, I witnessed many things that I gradually remembered. The point is, after, something happened. There was a fire in the kitchen. The flames spread quickly, devouring the facilities. Of course, both I and many of the inmates knew that this was the perfect opportunity to escape from that hell. Instead of trying to control the fire or help others get out, several of us made our way through the fire to get out of there. Since most of the staff were at the front, we escaped through the back. So when we got out of the center, we didn't head towards the road, but towards the mountain. Of course, the most logical thing would have been, since we were outside, to simply go around the building and run towards the road. But none of us were thinking clearly at that moment. So we ran and went deep into the mountain. The mountain led us to a hill. In all that chaos, we separated. I don't know what happened to the others, but I hid in a ditch I found on the way because I didn't want to climb the hill. I stayed there hidden in the ditch until the sun set, and at dusk I walked to the other side of the mountain and luckily found the road. I stayed at the side of the road until I flagged down a car and a couple stopped and offered their help. They didn't ask questions, as if they realized I was in a bad state, and the last thing I needed was to talk about what happened. I asked them to please take me to my family's house. It wasn't actually that far, and they did. When I made it back, I told them what they'd done to me. Well, what little I remembered, but of course they didn't believe me. My family believed what was reported on the local news. The news said that several of the inmates had organized to set the place on fire. But the truth is, I don't care whether they believe me or not. The only important thing was that the place was completely destroyed, and therefore I no longer had to return. But the nightmare didn't end there, because as the days went by, I began to remember some of the things that happened during the 6 weeks I was subjected to the brainwashing. The memories I have and scenes are without much context. That is, just fragments. To give you an idea, imagine you're watching the trailer of a movie that has many disconnected sequences that weren't necessarily in order and lacked context, but I was still able to reconstruct some of what happened. What I can assure you is the rehabilitation center was just a facade for a cult, with significant influence to carry out their tumultuous activities. As you can imagine, there were certain types of sacrifices, but the members of the cult never dirtied their hands with blood. They needed scapegoats to do the work for them. That's where the symbol of the triangle with the dot in the center becomes relevant. Within the cult, that symbol signifies something like permission to corrupt the laws of nature, meaning that those who have the symbol marked on their skin are allowed to kill. So, what they did was choose people just as they chose me, broke our minds, and left us so damaged that they could manipulate us to the point that we would obey without question. I don't understand much about the subject, but I'm sure that being in underwear while we were subjected to brainwashing was to make me feel defenseless and make it easier to break me. Now I understand why those who had the mark refused to talk about it. They must have endured horrible things without being able to resist, because their will was ashes. I remember some of the things those people forced me to do. I pulled teeth from more than one person without anesthesia, forcibly removed nails, broke noses, and other things I'd rather not mention. The person I did that to did not perish during the process, because in those sect sections there was a doctor in charge of keeping them alive, so that they could have a bigger show. I guess all the victims were people who were kidnapped, or homeless, people who were sex workers, orphans, I don't know. The important part is I did terrible things to them, and I know that even though I don't intend to do it, even though I was forced, I know that I did it, and that God will punish me for it, because every time I have a nightmare, I see myself in hell. My husband and I bought our 1916 Sears model home in June of 2019. I was so excited, as I love old homes the best, and wondered about all the haunts that could possibly exist. I even paid a whole $1 to a website that tells you if someone has died in your house. Nothing. I was bummed that no one had died in our new house. My husband was so relieved. Skip to November 1st, 2021. I woke up at 6:30 a.m. to a text from a friend. She sends me a link to a local newspaper story and says, "Thought you might enjoy a little history about your home." In my sleepy stupor, I click the link and am greeted with a giant black and white side view of my house. In this story, I learn of Dr. Orville C. Walker, who had lived here with his wife and 4-year-old son in the year of 1921. He was awoken with an emergency house call in the early morning of Wednesday, September 28th. As he got up and made his way into his garage, our now home office, he was shot and killed. He was taken into his bedroom immediately, now my 15-year-old son's room, but was deceased. I had no idea. I skipped down the stairs, excitedly approaching my poor husband, who was washing dishes before he left for work, and said, "I have the most exciting news ever about our house." And when I told him that someone had lost their life in our house and it had never been solved, he wasn't as excited as I was. I showed him the article. Not only was it the front page of our city newspaper, but it was also the neighboring city's newspaper as well. After reading the article, my husband freaked out. As you see, the day he died was my husband's birthday. We then realized that the good Dr. Orville was murdered on Wednesday, September 28th, at the age of 33. My husband will be 33 next year, and I swear to God it falls on a Wednesday. And wouldn't you know, he turned 33 on Wednesday, September 28th of the following year. He didn't want to be home that day, but luckily everyone seemed to like him, so we weren't worried about any assassination attempts. With that all being said, any activity we have had always involved windows on our second floor. We always hear doors opening and closing, and footsteps down the hall. My dogs hear them and goes absolutely mental with excitement, thinking someone is coming downstairs, but no one's there. There's a window in our bedroom that we never open, because there's no screen for it. That has been wide open before in the fall around this time of year. Our bedroom is full of dead leaves and freezing cold, and I hear music at night, incredibly faint from a radio. We've sat in our living room and heard the basement door in our kitchen open and close. His funeral was held in the parlor, our living room, and we contracted a gentleman who works at our local library and learned so much from him, as he had been researching the murder for years. Turns out that our doctor was not very well liked around here by a lot of the men in the area, due to his infidelities and willingness to perform illegal abortions, so there were many suspects. His family even suspects his wife of some foul play. We have stacks of court documents and newspaper clippings, and we plan to make a video about it one day. We did find his grave. He's buried with a simple marker in Cleveland's Lakeview Cemetery, with a great view of President Garfield's tomb and monument. No family nearby, just him.
This happened to me about 15 years ago just outside of Vancouver, British Columbia. I was out eating dinner with my father and his friend. A casual night with good conversation. After dinner, we decided to head back to my father's house. We had parked in 2 different spots at the restaurant, so my father drove his car and I ended up riding with his friend. I was fine when we left, feeling normal and relaxed after a nice meal. But things quickly took a strange turn. About halfway home, I suddenly began to feel awful. It came on so fast and out of nowhere. One minute I was perfectly fine, and the next I was overwhelmed with a sense of nausea and dread. I didn't have any time to process what was happening before I told my father's friend to pull over. I quickly got out the car, stumbled to the side and puked. But then, just as suddenly as it came on, it was gone. The feeling of sickness and dread abated, like nothing had happened. It was bizarre. There was no lingering discomfort, no aftertaste of what had caused it. I felt fine, again. Like it was a strange, fleeting moment that had never existed. We continued on our way, reaching my father's house shortly after. His property was on a steep, sloped mountainside, so his driveway was really steep. Twisting upwards as we pulled up the drive, something happened that I'll never forget. My father's friend slammed on the brakes, his eyes wide with fear, and I could feel my heart rate spike in response. In the headlights right in front of us was what looked like a woman. I couldn't see her face, but I could see her long hair cascading down to her knees, floating all around. She was wearing a white dress with frills, but there was something deeply unsettling about her. She had no feet. She was floating, gliding about a foot or so above the ground, moving from right to left, as if she were drifting by us. Whatever it was appeared solid enough to be highlighted by the car's headlights, but I couldn't make out any real detail. No face, just long hair and that eerily flowing dress. It passed by quickly, almost as if it was in a rush to disappear, and both of us were frozen in shock. Neither of us said anything for a moment. The air felt heavy, and the night suddenly seemed much darker. My father's friend was visibly shaken, and I didn't know what to think. We continued up the driveway, both of us silent, and once we got inside the house, we thought the strange moment was over. But it wasn't. It wasn't about 10 minutes later, when my father's friend rushed to the washroom and I could hear him vomiting. He came out pale and rattled, barely able to speak. He hadn't mentioned feeling sick before we saw her, but now he was affected as I had been earlier, as though some invisible force had followed us home. I still think about it to this day, and it creeps me out every time I do. What did we see? Was it a spirit, an apparition? I've tried looking up similar experiences, but nothing quite matches what we encountered that night. A floating woman in the white dress with no feet. She was real enough to be caught in the car's headlights. But what was she? And why does she seem to affect us in such a profound way, even after we'd driven past her? Has anyone ever experienced anything like this? I'd love an explanation, as it still haunts me. It was my first place, a small studio apartment that I had just moved into. The place was simple, sparsely furnished with just the basics, a couch, TV, and one of those old 90s halogen floor lamps with a dimmer switch. It was cozy, and I had been spending a lot of time there getting settled in and enjoying the solitude. The apartment felt quite peaceful, until that night. I was sitting on the couch just minding my own business. The TV was off, and the only sound was the hum of the apartment building's air conditioning in the distance. It was one of those moments where you're completely alone, with no distractions, just the faint buzz of the world around you. I was probably scrolling on my phone when the halogen floor lamp, the one I had barely touched since moving in, began to flicker. It was like the bulb had a mind of its own, and without warning, the brightness on the lamp shot up to the highest setting, blindingly bright, like someone had cranked the dimmer switch all the way up. I froze. It was so sudden and so loud that it almost felt like the light itself had a presence, like it was trying to get my attention. But that wasn't the worst part. At the exact moment the light hit its blinding peak, I heard it, a deep, bellowing laugh. It wasn't just any laugh. It was a voice, a woman's voice, loud and forceful, as though someone was standing right there in the room with me. The laugh was so clear, so real, that it sent a cold wave of dread through my chest. It didn't echo or fade. It was crisp and unmistakable, like it had come from the air itself. I felt it in my bones, the way it seemed to fill the entire room, pressing in on me. The laugh wasn't warm or inviting. It was sinister, like something mocking me, like it had been waiting to make its presence known. I sat there frozen for what felt like an eternity. The laugh lingered for a moment before it stopped abruptly, leaving only the deafening silence in its wake. My heart was pounding in my ears. I wanted to move, to turn around, but something in me told me not to. The light, still at its brightest setting, almost felt like it was waiting, as if something else was about to happen. I glanced around the room, my eyes darting to every corner, looking for any explanation, but there was nothing. No one was there. The door was locked. The windows were closed. I was completely alone. The laugh didn't make sense. It didn't belong. I quickly stood up, my legs shaky, and I rushed over to the lamp as if turning it off could somehow reset whatever had just happened. My hand hovered over the dimmer switch with a quick twist. The light flickered back down to normal, a soft glow. The apartment felt heavier, colder, like something had shifted in the air. I stood there for a while staring at the lamp, as if waiting for something else to happen. But nothing did. I didn't sleep much that night. All small noises made me jump, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't really alone. The laugh, the sudden burst of light. It all felt like a warning, like something had just been trying to remind me that I was in its space and not the other way around. Maybe it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. Or perhaps something else entirely. I moved out not long after, but every time I think about it, that laugh echoes in my mind. Lately, I've been seeing a shadow from the corner of my eye, but I didn't think much of it at first. I figured it was just sleep deprivation, maybe my mind playing tricks on me. But today, something happened that made me stop and really think about it. I was having a discussion with my two brothers, just talking and catching up, when I happened to glance over into the kitchen. In that moment I saw it, a shadow, human-sized, darting across the kitchen. It was fast, almost too quick to make sense, but it was there. I was genuinely surprised, and without thinking I asked my brother, "Did you see that?" He turned to look at me, his expression matching mine, shock. He confirmed that he had seen something too, but only like in his peripheral vision, like I had in the past. I, on the other hand, had seen it clearly in full view, and that was the thing that really threw me off. What made it even stranger was that no one was in the kitchen at the time. If it had been anyone, we would have heard them, especially since the kitchen is right by the living room where we were talking. The kitchen was completely empty. My other brother didn't see anything at all and suggested it might have been a bug or something else, but that didn't make any sense to me. It couldn't have been anyone else, and I knew it. I know this might sound like a minor thing, maybe even a little silly, but it was enough to make me stop and wonder. It's not a big dramatic story, just a moment that left me with more questions than answers, and I'll probably forget about it eventually, but for now, it's just one of those strange things I needed to get off my chest.
I was around 5 to 7 years old when this happened. At the time, I lived with my mom and my 2 sisters in a modest 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom house. The house was next door to a funeral home, which always gave me an uneasy feeling, especially at night. I would see my dad on Wednesdays and Saturdays, but the rest of the time it was just us. I shared a room with one of my sisters, and whenever I woke up in the middle of the night, I'd always run straight to my mum's room to sleep beside her. I don't know why, but I was terrified of that house at night. Every single night. One evening after coming home from my dad's house, I decided to play a little prank. I crawled into my bed, panning to pretend I was asleep and scare my mum when she came to check on me. But as soon as I lie down, exhaustion took over me, and I passed out. When I woke up, it was around 1:30 a.m., and as usual, fear crept in. I bolted to my mum's room for comfort, but to my surprise, she wasn't there. I checked the living room. Nothing. That's when I realized she must have stayed the night at her boyfriend's house. Panic set in as I raced back to my room and dove under the blankets. Then it hit me. My sister, the one I shared the room with, wasn't at home either. She was staying over at a friend's house, and I was utterly alone. As I lay there trying to calm myself, I started to hear it. The unmistakable clanging of pots and pans coming from the kitchen. My heart pounded in my chest as I froze in terror. I immediately threw the blankets over my head, willing the sound to stop. The noise continued for what felt like an eternity, 10 full minutes of relentless banging. Desperate to convince myself it was just a nightmare, I pinched and punched myself all over, but the pain was real. This wasn't a dream. Finally, the noise stopped, and silence filled the house once more. Cautiously, I peeked out from under my blankets, and that's when I saw him. In the hallway directly across from my bed, a man was hanging in front of my sister's door. His head was obscured, but I could clearly see the rest of him. Black dress pants and polished black dress shoes. I froze, unable to move or scream, just staring in pure terror. Then, as if instinct took over, I pulled the blankets back over my head and squeezed my eyes shut. I don't know how, but at some point I fell asleep. The next morning I told my mum and sister what I'd seen. They were as freaked out as I was. 6 months later we moved out and into my mum's boyfriend's house. Now I'm 18, about to turn 19, and I still think about that night. I've always believed the man I saw was a spirit from the funeral home next door, given the way he was dressed. What's strange is that my friend's grandma lives in that house now, and she's never experienced anything unusual. But the memory will stay with me forever.
I live in a townhouse, and my neighbor practices voodoo. Last summer, I had an experience that I can't explain. Let me take you back. It was just a typical afternoon, and she was sitting across the street on the curb watching her 2 kids play in the street. I went outside to take the trash. My townhouse has 2 doors, the first a storm door, and the second the main door to the house. As I opened my storm door, something strange occurred. I was looking over at them, and I could see her house. Her door across the street opened by itself. It moved slowly, not with the wind, but as if it were being gently pulled. The door opened all the way, and then after a brief pause, it slowly shut again. I stood there for a moment, trying to figure out what had just happened.
I looked over at her, expecting her to notice, but she was still sitting on the curb, completely unaware. She didn't even look up. There was no reaction from her. That's when I felt it. I couldn't see anything, but there was a presence beside me. It was as if someone was standing right next to me, but when I looked, there was nothing there. I couldn't explain it, but I could feel it. The feeling wasn't threatening, just there. It stayed for about 30 seconds, maybe a little more, before it vanished. It wasn't sudden. It just faded, and the sensation of being watched disappeared. Later, I remembered that my neighbor practiced voodoo and had been working with energies recently. She hadn't completely closed her circle, and I wonder if that had something to do with what happened. Could the spirits have come from that and made the door open in that way? I guess I'll never know. Back in 1982, my family had just moved to California from New York. My dad was very close friends with William Peter Blatty, the author of The Exorcist. As a kid, I spent a lot of time at Bill's house, a fascinating and slightly eerie place given his work. Around that time, my grandmother had passed away suddenly, which was still fresh in our minds. One evening, we were visiting Bill's house, and he and my dad were upstairs in Bill's office experimenting with some audio equipment. Bill had a setup for recording EVPs, essentially capturing potential spirit voices. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was 12 and more interested in playing a video game in another room. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a strange, almost otherworldly voice coming through the speakers. It called out clear as day, "Nikki, Red." My heart stopped. That was my grandmother's nickname for my grandfather, and it wasn't something anyone outside the family would know. I bolted into the living room where everyone was freaking out, trying to figure out what had just happened. At that moment, my dad and Bill walked in, startled by the commotion. They explained they'd been recording upstairs, and there's no way Bill could have faked it. He didn't even know the nickname. To this day, I can still hear the voice in my mind, and it never fails to give me chills. Years later, when I was in my 20s, I had another strange encounter. At the time, I was living at home, and my bedroom was tucked away at the end of a small, dark, alley-like space. The room itself was dim and a little eerie, but I never thought much of it. I always wore my grandmother's wedding band on a chain, a keepsake that made me feel connected to her. One night, I took it off and placed it in my dresser, as I always did. The next morning it was gone. I searched everywhere, every drawer, every corner of the room, but it had simply vanished. I was devastated, thinking I had somehow lost it forever. Then, about a week later, it reappeared. I walked into my room and there it was, sitting right on top of my TV in plain sight. I asked everyone in the house if they had moved it, but no one had touched it. It was baffling, but I was relieved to have it back. Not long after, something even stranger happened. One night I woke up suddenly, the room dimly lit by the bluish glow of my alarm clock. Sitting at the edge of my bed was a man quietly watching me. He wasn't solid, more like a faint silhouette, but I could make out enough detail to see he was wearing a suit, something that seemed straight out of the 1940s. I jolted upright, and just like that, he was gone. I tried to convince myself it was just a vivid dream, but then it happened again a few days later. This time I woke up, sat up abruptly and saw him again. He looked at me for a moment before slowly fading away, like smoke dissolving into the air. Oddly enough, I wasn't scared. He didn't feel threatening, more like he was simply curious. Maybe he was tied to that room, or perhaps drawn to me in some way. But I never did see him again after that. I sometimes wonder what he witnessed while I lived there.
Those were my wild, carefree years after all. I've had several unsettling experiences while growing up in my father's home, but this one stands out, even more than the time I actually saw a spirit. My parents had split up, so my brother and I would travel to my dad's farm on the weekends. I was 11 at the time, and I spent most of my weekends cleaning, doing laundry, and helping my dad with household chores, especially since he spent a lot of time working in the fields during the summer. One afternoon, my dad and brother had left the house for a while. I had just finished cleaning the bathroom and was sitting on my bed folding laundry. My back was to the doorway and everything seemed normal. Then out of nowhere, a deep sense of fear washed over me. It was so intense it froze me in place. I felt as if someone was standing directly behind me, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I could hear in my head, "Do not turn around, do not turn around." I couldn't move, I couldn't speak. I was paralyzed with fear for what felt like at least 2 minutes. It was as though whatever was standing behind me was urging me not to turn around, and I was doing everything I could to resist the overwhelming urge to look. Then, just as suddenly as the feeling had come, it vanished. It felt like whatever was behind me had given up, perhaps because I had refused to look. But before I could even process what had just happened, I heard a long, loud, scraping sound coming from the bathroom. It took me a minute to gather enough courage to check it out. The bathroom was right next to my bedroom, so to get out of the room I had to pass it. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I forced myself to walk past the bathroom door, my eyes nervously flicking towards it. When I stepped into the bathroom, my blood ran cold. My dad's shaving cream, which had been neatly placed on the counter just moments before, was now dragged halfway off the edge. It was hanging precariously, half on the counter, half dangling off the side like someone had pulled it. I had just cleaned the bathroom and made sure everything on the counter was lined up against the backsplash, so there was no logical explanation for it. I didn't waste another second in that house. I ran out of there so fast, not even stopping to grab anything. I waited outside until my dad and brother came home, and I didn't go back until they returned. It may not sound like much, but the terror I felt in that moment left me shaken, and the fear lingered for long after the event, and I had trouble sleeping for several days after that.
My friend Zena lives in what is believed to be a haunted house, and after a long break, we decided to dive back into ghost hunting. It's been a while since my first experience, but I still can't shake the memories. It all started with a balloon in Zena's basement closet. We were using a spirit box app, and my friend decided to try the Estes method, where she listened to the box through noise-cancelling headphones while blindfolded. The only thing she muttered was something like, "Don't trust her." But when she came out of the trance, she had no memory of saying anything. For context, Zena's family believes they may have connected with 2 spirits during the pandemic, a boy and a girl, possibly twins. Part of me wonders if the little girl temporarily took over my friend during that session. We went into the basement, and I got this incredibly vivid mental image, almost like a story playing out in my mind. At first, I thought it might be my imagination, but there were things I couldn't explain. I don't remember the original story of the house, but names started coming through the spirit box, and one stood out: Lincoln. I became convinced that Lincoln was a servant to the man who originally owned the house. In my mind's eye, I saw a scene unfold, a man rushing down the stairs and yelling at the servant to bring up a bottle of wine. It made me believe the basement, or at least part of it, was once a wine cellar. When I shared this with Zena, she confirmed that the basement had been a wine cellar, something I had no prior knowledge of. I even mentioned wooden walls, thinking it was just my imagination, but Xena told me her parents had removed wooden paneling from the wall. I couldn't believe it. In the story playing out in my mind, Lincoln's boss was a man in his 30s, dressed in a black three-piece suit. While Lincoln and the other servants searched for the wine, I saw a heavy shelf collapse on them. This vision or memory was so detailed that I could even sketch the room's layout. Then there was the piano. It originally belonged to Xena's great-grandmother, but after her death it was passed down to Xena's aunt, who eventually bequeathed it to Xena herself. The piano had also spent time in the church where it was played during funerals. We decided to try contacting her great-grandmother. We bought the piano, a small handheld mirror, and some items that belonged to her into the basement. Things stayed quiet until Xena asked if she could play the piano. Suddenly, the spirit box said no, and we both got full-body chills. I was recording the session on my laptop, but when we fled upstairs to calm down and returned, the video file was missing. After ghost hunting, I went home, but strange things started happening. Whenever I took a shower, I felt like I was being watched. At night, I would hear knocks on my windows and saw a strange orb, like the lingering spot of light you see after staring at something bright. Only this was dark blue, and disappeared when I blinked. I eventually got my own spirit box, and during one session it just said one word: soul. Around that time I began experiencing odd sensations, cold breath down the back of my neck, a strange thought as if my brain were referring to me in the third person. When I visited Xena's house again, I brought the spirit box. We didn't use it until I was about to leave. We turned it on and asked if any spirits were present, and a gravelly, chilling voice responded, "Yes." Since then, things have been quiet. But as we prepare for another ghost hunting session, I can't help but feel both excitement and dread. If you have any advice, tips, or even an explanation, I would love to hear it.
A month ago, I had to deal with probably the hardest thing I have ever had to deal with up until this point in my life. My once best friend and ex-fiancé overdosed on fentanyl and passed. We broke up a little over 5 years ago due to his addiction. I am not one who ever has or ever will use drugs, but sadly he fell down that path. We did not end things on a bad note, however. After years and years of attempting to help him get over his addiction, including but not limited to rehabs, clinics, therapists, support groups, I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't stand the lies. I couldn't stand the BS. Most of all, I couldn't stand watching him slowly end his own life. It was his addiction that really helped me understand the famous saying, if you truly love someone, sometimes you have to let them go. This is exactly what happened. I was afraid I was enabling him by saying if things didn't change, I would have to end things and not act on it. Right before we broke up, I gave him an ultimatum, which was to either make a real effort to change by leaving his triggers behind and work towards bettering himself emotionally, mentally, physically, and professionally, which I would support, or respect that this was not the life I wanted and it was time we end things. He gave me the most honest answer any addict could give, which was, I want to change, but I can't promise you I can. And I understand where you're coming from and I will respect your wishes. As hard as it was to end things, we did. At the time, I was living 100 miles away from him because I was in college, and though he had a lot of his property in my apartment, he stayed with his parents because he had a bar job near their home, which was really where he would get the drugs. He drove down to have this conversation, but it was after midnight when he arrived. I asked him to take his cat home, gave him my ring, and said I would pack up his stuff and arrange for him to come and pick it up. He agreed. We cuddled for about half an hour and talked a bit, then he grabbed his cat and left. One of the last things I told him before he left was to never let me get the call that he had died. He laughed and told me that would never happen. After that, I never saw him again. His mum called me a few days later and said he went to inpatient. She then started saying she and his father would be coming down to grab his stuff when I was ready for them to do so. His family and I got on wonderfully, and we still do, so I was happy to have them come down and arrange for it to happen a few weeks later. When they came down, I helped them move his items out. As I was loading their truck, his mum and I were talking, and she thanked me for everything, as well as reiterating that she did not blame me one bit for leaving. She prayed that he would get clean and live a full life, to which I agreed, and I told her I don't ever want to get back with him, but I want to see him live a happy, full life, and hoped that we could be best friends again one day. Time passed and we both moved on. I met an incredible man at school who I'm still with today. He met another sweet woman who he had a kid with. Sadly, they didn't work out. However, he dated multiple sweet ladies, including the sweet lady he was with when he passed away. I would periodically get texts from him over the years and thought I would reply. I was definitely not the talker between the two of us because I never wanted to give him false hopes that we would get back together. In addition, I would hear through the grapevine periodically that he was still using, which his pictures on social media supported because I could see it on his face and in his eyes. This is when things got weird. On Friday, December 16th, I got the call that I was always fearing I would get. Our friend from Hawaii, where we lived for 4 of the 6 years we were together, called me to tell me he had overdosed and was in a coma. What was crazy was that I turned off my Facebook Messenger notices a few weeks earlier because I was getting so many notifications. Yet before this call came in, his brother and sister-in-law tried to message me on there. I, of course, lost it. Our friend said he was flying out to stay with his family and see him in the hospital. I told him we'll talk more when he gets there. The next day, our Hawaii friend texted me to tell me that he was coming in on Monday and said his mum said there was no sign of brain activity, but they had to run more tests. It was this night when things started to get strange. I woke up around 2:30 a.m. from a dead sleep, and I felt him leave. It was a feeling I've never felt before, and I knew right then and there that he was gone. I knew he wasn't coming back. The next day I called a few other people who we knew in Hawaii that did not know what had happened to tell him that he was in a coma and that we were not sure if he was going to make it. As I was talking to one of our other mutual friends, I suddenly felt that I was about to get a call that he was officially dead, and within 2 to 3 minutes, I had another call come in. It was my ex's brother-in-law. I answered and said, "Is this that call?" And he mumbled, "Yeah, I'm so sorry, sweetheart." "Okay, thank you. Love you, bro." He told me he loved me too, and we hung up. That night, I woke up at 3:30 from a dead sleep and heard his laugh, clear as day, in the living room. He had a very unique laugh that I could recognize anywhere, and I couldn't go back to sleep. I was in tears. I knew he was there. Later that day, my boyfriend and I started packing for a trip we were getting ready to go on the following week for Christmas. My boyfriend had his Spotify on, and eventually it started playing random songs that were similar to his playlist. 3 of my favorite songs that my ex would play, as he was a musician, came on in a row. It tripped me out so much I went and restarted the playlist midway through the 3rd song. The next day I went to the store to grab a few last-minute gifts and toiletries for our trip. As I was in the store, the same 3 songs that were played the day before, in the same order, began to play. When the 3rd song came on, I dropped my items and just left. That night, I woke up from a dead sleep at 3:30, but this time, it was because I felt someone sitting at the end of the bed. I knew he was there. I didn't go back to sleep. The next day, my boyfriend and I flew out for our holiday trip.
We landed in Vegas because it was the closest airport to our destination, and I had never been to Vegas, so we toured the strip before going to where we needed to be. I was having so much fun and getting lost in life. And guess what starts playing in one of the casinos? The same 3 songs in the same order. I was freaked out. I couldn't believe it. Things settled for about a week, with the exception of waking up every night at 3:30 a.m. precisely. This time, though, I would not hear, sense, or see anything. I would just wake up. The day we were getting ready to head home, my boyfriend's brother was driving us to the airport. And guess what comes on the radio? The same 3 songs, in the exact same order. By this point, I already accepted it was him. His funeral was the day after we got home, to which I attended. His family was happy to see me. Our friends for Hawaii were happy I was there as well, and many of our mutual friends were there too. All in all, I was glad I went, but it was hard. I had a couple of nights where I slept through the night, and then he started to appear in my dreams. The first times I shrugged it off as grief. The third time he appeared in my dream, I could not dismiss it as grief. He kept telling me that I needed to try hard cider with whiskey as we sat in a recording studio with 2 of our other friends who passed years prior. I kept trying to tell a group outside of the room something through loudspeakers, but kept getting interrupted by my ex and our other deceased friends. When I woke up, I couldn't stop thinking about the drink. I reached out to my friend from Hawaii who was staying on my ex's family farm later in the day and asked him, without any context, "Do you have a thing with hard cider and whiskey?" He laughed and was like, "Yeah bro, why?" This was not a thing I knew about, and it was definitely not a thing when my ex and I were together. It was so trippy and I was like, okay. After this, I started to wake up every night at 3:30 a.m. until last night. Last night I had the craziest dream of all of them. My ex and I were in this random hotel room in Vegas talking. He then started to talk about my current boyfriend, but not in the way that was uncomfortable, more like he wanted to know him. I told him how happy he and I were, and that I think we were the best thing that ever happened to each other. He smiled and told me he was happy for me, and that all he wanted was for me to be happy. He asked if we could lay down and cuddle with him though, and I said I would, but nothing naughty, because it was not fair to my boyfriend. He said okay, we did. He whispered in my ear and told me that he would always love me, always be happy, and never give up, and change the world. Then I woke up. Today has been rather crazy. I have been presented with 3 incredible opportunities out of the blue, 1 academic and 2 professional, all of which I'm considering and taking the next steps to apply for, and all of which would allow me to build up on my life-saving research project. In addition, I got a random message on LinkedIn from someone asking me if my current employer is hiring, which I verified they are. I didn't want to leave my current employer stranded when I moved on to bigger and better things. I cannot say if this was him, or if it's all in my head, but somehow I feel a sense of peace. I know that he always cared for me and I will always care for him, but we were on 2 different paths in the world. I don't feel scared, I no longer feel alone. I have my best friend back, I have part of my old group back. They're just spirits, which I'm totally okay with, and in some ways, happier, because they're always there. I know some may dismiss this, but maybe my story will bring a sense of peace to others. Death is not the end. It's just another form of life. I don't understand it, but I don't fear it. All I know is that having my spirit homies is badass. And though it sucks they died, I'm glad that they're still around me. When I was in 3rd grade, my mum was a single parent, and we lived in these run-down apartments on the rougher side of town. Each unit had a tiny square yard out back, followed by an alley, and then this massive stone wall. On the other side of that wall, a cemetery. All the apartments were 2 stories, and you could hear everything. The walls were so thin you'd hear the neighbors brushing their teeth or coughing through the night. Our apartment always had this strange energy. Whenever I was downstairs, I'd hear noises upstairs like things moving around. I had a box of marbles, and sometimes it sounded like they were rolling across the tile floor upstairs. There was also a bowling pin I'd gotten for my birthday from a bowling alley, and I swear I'd hear it tip over on its own, but I didn't think much of it. With thin walls, I figured it was just the neighbors or maybe my imagination. Well, one night I was in the living room watching cartoons. My mum was upstairs giving my little sister a bath when I heard something in the kitchen. We didn't have a proper trash can, just a small plastic bag tied to the back door handle for trash. The sound I heard was that bag coming untied. It fell to the floor with a soft thud. "Mom, the trash fell," I yelled. From upstairs, I heard her shout back to me to pick it up. I hesitated though. Something about it felt off. I got up and crept into the kitchen. The light switch, annoyingly, was on the other side of the room near the door. As I made my way in, I suddenly heard this low rumbling sound that made me freeze in my tracks. I knew what it was, the water heater. It was in a little closet next to the kitchen just around the corner, but even knowing what it was, the sound still scared me. It rumbled again, louder this time, and again. I started backing up and moving slowly away, my heart pounding. Then out of nowhere I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was like the whoosh of a stick whipping through the air, and then a clatter. I turned and looked over my shoulder just in time to see a pen rolling across the tile floor. Now when you walked into our kitchen, immediately to the left was the refrigerator, and next to that was a glass table. And right next to that was the little room with the water heater. On the fridge, my mum had this little cup magnet that held pens and pencils. It just hung above the table. I stood there frozen, staring at the pen on the floor. My mind raced. The trash bag had untied itself. I'd heard strange noises, and now a pen had been thrown across the room. Even as a kid, I tried to make sense of it logically. Maybe my mum hadn't tied the bag that well. Maybe something was in the bag, an animal perhaps, which had caused it to move and fall. But if that were the case, where did it go after the bag hit the floor? Why was there no more noise after it fell? And the pen? If it had just fallen out the cup, it should have landed on the glass table first, making a distinct sound before hitting the floor. But I hadn't heard that. It was as if the pen had been thrown. That night stuck with me. I didn't have any answers then, and honestly, I still don't.
I used to run a small stall in a bustling market in Juarez, known locally as a segunda. These markets were a lively mix of stalls, selling both new and used goods, and I made my living offering handmade crafts and clothing. My stall was filled with quartz crystals, small statues of Buddhas, saints, and other spiritual items. I also sold clothes made from manta, a beautiful lightweight fabric, dresses, blouses, and suits that people seemed to love. One day a young woman approached my stall. She lingered for a moment, her eyes scanning its items on display, before asking if she could sit and talk. There was something about her presence that felt different. I had a small table where I always kept a lit candle and a glass of water for protection, rituals I maintained out of respect for the energies I often encountered. She introduced herself as a medium, though she didn't say much more about her abilities. I wasn't sure if she knew that I, too, was sensitive to spirits, but I had a feeling she did. As we began to talk, the energy around us shifted. Her voice suddenly changed, and that's when I realized this conversation wasn't going to be ordinary. She started to channel spirits. At first, the spirits that came through were young and tragic, each saying how they had passed, each one heartbreaking. And then a different one arrived. I couldn't see her physically, but I sensed her with absolute clarity. She came into the focus of my mind's eye, a little girl with her head tilted to one side.
I could picture her dress, simple and delicate, and the way she carried herself. I decided to speak to her. "Hey, your dress is really pretty." She smiled faintly and replied, "Isn't it?" "Yeah, it's beautiful." "Aren't I pretty?" Her question made my heart ache. I nodded gently. "Yes, but why is your head tilted like that?" "Because of the rope," she said simply. I hesitated, unsure how to proceed, but pressed on. "Was it your own doing?" "Yes." A deep sadness settled over me as I asked, "Can you tell me what happened?" She explained that at school the other children teased her relentlessly. They called her ugly and mocked her clothes. The constant bullying had left her feeling worthless and hopeless. Her words were filled with the kind of sorrow that no child should ever experience. I tried to comfort her as best I could. "I have a candle and a glass of water. Please take them with you on your journey, and go to your mum, give her a kiss and ask her for forgiveness." "But I don't know where I am. I can't see my own finger. It's too dark. And the last moment of my life I have to relive it over and over." I swallowed the lump in my throat and asked, "When will you be able to go?" "Not until the day I was supposed to die." My heart broke for her. I wanted to help, to offer some kind of solace. "What's your name? I'll pray for you." She spoke her name, but the voice was no longer hers. It was deep, cold, and unnatural, carrying a darkness that seemed to fill the air. Marta. The sound sent shivers down my spine. It wasn't just a name. It felt like something ugly and ominous had taken hold of her. It was the most unsettling moment I've ever experienced in all my years of connecting with spirits. Despite my fears, I promised her I would pray for her, hoped with all my heart that wherever she was, her suffering would come to an end. And after that day, the young woman who had come to the stall never returned. I am an online student, so most of my days are spent in my room, which is tucked away at the end of a long hallway. I always leave my door open. It makes the space feel less isolated and helps me feel connected to the rest of the house, even when I'm deep in my work. Yesterday morning started off like any other. I was sitting on my desk, focused on an assignment, when my dog, as usual, came bounding up the stairs to see me. She's a lively, affectionate companion, and her daily visits are one of my favorite parts of studying from home. She leapt onto my bed, wagging her tail, but then she did something unusual which caught my attention. Instead of looking at me or settling down, she froze and turned towards the hallway. Her ears perked up, and she started to tremble. Then she began barking, loud, relentless barks directed at the empty corridor. At first I thought maybe she'd heard a noise or spotted something outside, but the intensity of her reaction was unlike anything I'd seen before. Normally, if she gets startled, I can calm her down by speaking to her or redirecting her attention. But this time nothing worked. Her eyes stayed locked on the hallway, and she wouldn't even glance in my direction. I tried to reassure her, but her barking only grew more frantic. It was just the two of us at home, so I decided to check the hallway myself. I stood in the doorway and scanned the space, expecting to find something, maybe a shadow, a strange light, or even an object out of place. But it was just the same dark, empty stretch of hallway, as always, silent and still. Her barking continued for nearly an hour, echoing through the house and sending chills down my spine. The only thing that finally snapped her out of it was when my grandmother arrived. Even then she stayed close to me, her body tense, her eyes darting nervously towards the hallway. She wouldn't leave my room, and it was clear she was still unsettled by whatever had spooked her. What made this experience even more unsettling is the fact that my family and I have a history of ghost hunting. It's something we've done together over the years, always taking precautions to protect ourselves. Before and after every investigation, we set boundaries, making it clear that nothing is allowed to attach to us or follow us home. We even sage the house as an extra layer of protection.
However, it's been quite a while since we last saged the house. I can't help but wonder if something might have slipped through the cracks. Maybe whatever my dog sensed had been lingering unnoticed until now. Animals are known to pick up on things human can't, and her reaction felt too intense to ignore. Now I'm considering whether it's time to sage the house again to ensure that our space is clear and safe. Whether my dog was reacting to something supernatural or just something beyond my understanding. The experience left me unsettled. Whatever it was, I'm grateful for her sharp instincts and her unwavering determination to protect me from the unseen. I've had many ghost experiences, but I was told from a young age that I shouldn't fear them, for they were once flesh and blood like us. Once it happened when we all went to bed. I remember it clearly because my sisters experienced it with me. We're triplets, and at the time, we'd newly moved back into our childhood home after leaving Dad behind. So, we had just about nothing except for important items. One bunk bed and a bed on the ground, and we decided to switch from our normal beds. That night I slept on the bed on the ground, and remembered the room being completely dark. We were next to a very large window, and the moon was out, but there was no light except darkness and a weight against my chest. I woke up to see a snout of a dog inches away from my face, but from its teeth and its heavy breath, it was a wolf. I woke up to see the snout of a dog inches from my face, but from its teeth and its heavy breath, I could tell it wasn't a dog at all, but a wolf. The dark shadow of a wolf with only the face taken shape, as the rest of its body was in darkness. I heard my sisters calling to me, and it made the wolf lay its full weight on top of me, revealing the room. Wolves surrounded our bedroom as a pack watching us. I saw the three were surrounded in the bottom bunk where my older sister lay, and she kept holding their gaze. My younger sister on the top bunk had two wolves lying her down, and she couldn't move. None of them could. We called for my mother, who was next door, but Mum never woke because she couldn't hear us. I know for a fact if Mum heard one peep from either me or my sisters that sounded like a cry, she'd be busting the door down. But this was something that wanted to be acknowledged. The wolf holding me down laid his head on my belly, with his ears pinned back, and all of a sudden, I pet his head like I would any dog. Instantly the weight lifted, and I busted out of my bed, running to my sisters, checking. We still couldn't explain it, except that it happened, and all three of us experienced it. The second time, I'm sure it was his spirit. This is when I was 26 and back from my father's funeral service. He met a very sudden but tragic end, which my mum had warned him about, but he never listened. After the funeral, I was not in the best of headspaces since he and I practically cut ties, because I thought life is better with my father being away from me, but he was still my dad. I was awake watching One Piece, and all I was doing was crying. At the foot of my bed, I felt it shake like someone was at the end, holding it, trying to shake it. I didn't care when I noticed, and casually got up from my bed and opened my bedroom door to see a shadow man standing right in front of my face. It was a full-body man, taller than the fridge behind it. It backed away from me when I walked into the dark hallway and closed the door behind me, as I needed the restroom and didn't care that the spirit was wanting a reaction out of me. It was standing and tried to corner me, but I just looked at its dark face. I scoffed and closed the door and went back to bed with the TV on. I have no idea what or why that would have happened. I simply walked on. This happened just about an hour ago, and my heart is still racing. My girlfriend was fast asleep, and like most nights, I had gotten up to use the bathroom. While I was washing my hands, I heard her call my name from down the hall. At first, I thought she'd woken up, and was wondering where I was. She's a light sleeper, and it's happened before. I called back, "Just a second,"
But then I realized something was off. The voice didn't come from her room. It sounded like it came from the kitchen at the other end of the hallway. I tried to dismiss it, thinking maybe her voice had echoed or maybe I'd imagined it, but something about it didn't seem right with me. Like deep down I knew that something was wrong. For context, her house is small. The hallway isn't much of a hallway. It connects the bathroom, kitchen, and living room to the bedrooms at the end, and when I stepped out the bathroom and started heading back to her room, I froze. In the corner of the living room near the front door, I saw something. It wasn't human. It was a tall, dark mass, completely still, featureless, just standing there in the shadows watching me. My stomach dropped, and I couldn't move. It didn't make a sound, nor did it shift at all. It was just there in the corner of the room. I don't know how long I stood frozen, but after a few seconds I snapped out of it, and I bolted towards her room, my legs shaking. I quietly shut the door behind me and locked it, trying not to wake her. She was still sound asleep, but I could feel the fear creeping up on me. I sat on the bed trying to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe a shadow, maybe my tired brain playing tricks on me, but I couldn't explain the voice. It sounded exactly like her, calling me from the kitchen, but she had been asleep the entire time. I've had some weird experiences in our house before. It's not exactly haunted, but there's definitely something strange in the air. I can't stop replaying the image of that thing standing in the corner motionless, like it was watching, waiting. Now I'm here lying in bed trying to calm myself down without waking her. I'm not sure what to do. I'm not religious and not particularly spiritual, but whatever that thing was, I feel like I need to do something. I just don't know what. I live in an 1875 New England farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. The kind of place that, while full of charm, has an undeniable sense of something being off. I thought I'd start documenting the strange things that happened here, despite the fact that it's hard to capture the unsettling atmosphere in anything other than memory. Over the years, I've had a lot of people experience odd things here, and most of them seem strangely comfortable with it. But for me, it's a constant low hum of unease. Here's a quick note. Most of my friends get a weird and uncomfortable vibe when they visit. I've had people tell me without prompt, this isn't a house they'd want to live in, and honestly I get it. The place feels restless, sad, maybe even bitter at times. There's something off about it, and I can't quite put my finger on it. The other night I was in the living room with our dog while my partner was downstairs in the basement. We were just relaxing when we both heard a strange, semi-metallic thud from the corner of the room. It sounded like something solid had dropped to the floor. The dog perked up, looked around, but I brushed it off thinking maybe something had fallen into another room or outside. There was nothing obvious in the corner where the sound had come from. I tried to refocus on my book, but a moment later I was snapped out of it. I distinctly heard a quiet, like someone mulling something over under their breath. I paused. I had smoked a little earlier, so I thought maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, and I hesitated before picking up my book again. The dog was still, as though it didn't find the sound unusual. 5 minutes passed, and there it was again. A voice, this time unmistakably male, a low, as though someone was pondering something just outside the room. The refrigerator in the kitchen makes its usual creaks and groans, but that wasn't one of its sounds. I felt a chill. I messaged my partner to come upstairs. I wasn't comfortable being alone with whatever that was. When he came upstairs, I told him what happened, and 3 odd occurrences, all in quick succession. He settled into the living room with me, and for a while it seemed like things had settled. About 15 minutes later, I went to the kitchen to grab a drink. As I barely set the glass down on the counter, I heard it again. "What's wrong?" I froze, my heart skipping a beat. I called back, "What are you talking about?" His voice came from the living room, clear but puzzled. "What's wrong? You just made a noise like you were confused." I walked back to the living room holding my empty glass and asked, "Did it sound like, Did you hear that?" "Yeah, isn't that what you said?" "No, that's what I heard before. And now you heard it too." We'd both heard the same thing, the same voice, the same sound. And after that, it didn't happen again, not once. It left me with a strange feeling, like it had been trying to get our attention, but for what purpose? Then there was a bunch of other things that were puzzling me. When I first moved in over a decade ago, I shoved a bunch of random things under the old cold storage shelving, paint cans, odds and ends, and fake Christmas tree. The lighting in there was poor, and I didn't pay much attention to what I was stashing back there. Not long ago, I decided to see if I had any leftover paint to match a color I needed, and when I moved some things around, I saw it. A small baseball bat standing up on a cylinder block, tucked away in the back. It was odd considering I hadn't placed it there. I didn't remember it being there when I first moved in. I sent a message to the son of the previous owners asking if it was his bat or if it meant something to him. He said no, it wasn't. He never had a baseball bat, and it wasn't something connected to his family. His children were all girls, and the bat didn't belong to any grandchildren either. Now I'm left with this bat sitting under a shelf, oddly placed, and I can't help but wonder, where did it come from? Could it predate the 60s? Could it somehow be tied to the house's past in a way I haven't uncovered yet? It's just one of those strange, inexplicable things that makes me feel like there's more to this house than I've been able to grasp. Something about it doesn't sit right. I'm not sure why it's still there, and every time I look at it, the question only grows. What if the bat is connected to something that's been lingering here for much longer than I've realized? I'm curious if anyone else has experienced anything similar. Anything that made them feel that eerie sense of something just off in their home.
I've had plenty of weird and unexplainable experiences, but this one is the only one that I find difficult putting into words. When I was around 6, I remember whenever I found myself alone, I used to see a man in my house always behind me, in corners, behind the sofa I was sitting on. This happened for years. This thing was very human-like. There was not a faded or blurred line, and this thing would always be wearing the same clothes when I saw it. I would catch glimpses of it, and as soon as I turned around, it would be gone, as if nothing were there. I remember as a child it didn't scare me as much as it should have, but I was always super cautious and uneasy. It never made me run crying to my parents, though. What is weird is that at this time I recognized the man. In my head, the man was my uncle/family friend, who I thought was very much alive. So everything I saw, I put down to my imagination. A few years go by and I kept on seeing this. What I realized was that I never saw this man in real life. There were no pictures of him, never any meeting with families. So how could I possibly have this feeling that I knew him? How could my brain invent this character and backstory for him? I was asking around for this unidentified uncle, and it seems he never really existed. I looked at the family photos of the family who I thought were his, and nothing. Unfortunately, my father passed a few years ago, and since I've been trying to find photos of him, I came across a photo of my dad and his dad, my grandfather, who I'd never met. And the man I used to see looks a lot like him, but not an 100% match. My memories have obviously faded because of how long ago it was, but I know it's only in resemblance and not who I used to see as a child.